Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katja Filada, MBC Policy Officer. Just a few reminders before we begin. For transparency, all attendees are required to have their first and last name and organization in their display name. Please be informed that upon logging in, all participants are automatically promoted to panelist mode in preparation for our photo op later. Please be mindful and ensure that you are on mute to avoid disruption in the program. We encourage you to get your questions in early, even while the presentation is ongoing. You may send them in by typing it in the Q&A box. After the presentations, there will be an open discussion. Kindly turn your mic on when called and please state your name and organization before asking your questions. Today's session is being recorded by our team for documentation purposes. We may use all or part of it in our platforms and publications. Should there be any technical difficulties, you may send us a message in our chat box. To start our program, may I call on MBC's Executive Director, Coco Alcuaz. Coco?
Thanks very much, Kash. I'm Coco Alcuaz, Executive Director of Makati Business Club. I think I'm also the oldest person in today's Zoom. So from the previous generation to yours, greetings and thanks for joining. Welcome to the second day of FYI on FOI session for the youth. There are parallel activities for the business sector with the objective of building understanding and support for FOI legislation. Makati Business Club is pleased to be partnered in this with the US-based Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE. We'd like to acknowledge the presence of Pasig City Mayor Vico Soto, PCOO Undersecretary Chris Ablan, CIPE Southeast Asia Regional Coordinator Ryan Evangelista, and Dean Gary Ador Junicio from the Manila School of Diplomacy and Governance. Thank you all for joining us. Allow me to turn over to Alex Panagiton, our FOI Project Manager. Alex.
Thank you very much, Coco. Before we begin, let me acknowledge the 318 registrants for today's workshop, representing the youth in general, including school-based and community-based organizations, Sangguniang Kabataan, and the Academe. Here are the organizations they represent as shown on screen. Some of them are still logging in and joining us. We would also like to thank our organizational partners for this two-day workshop: FOI Youth Initiative, Youth Alliance on FOI, and Young Centrists Union. To officially open today's workshop, may I call on Mr. Ryan Evangelista, Philippine Director and Regional Coordinator for Southeast Asia of CIPE, for his remarks and to introduce our keynote speaker. Ryan?
Thank you very much, Alex and our colleagues from the Makati Business Club. Thank you very much, Coco, for your welcome as well to the group. It's my great pleasure to be here and join all of you on this session. This is the second day, and it's our great privilege to be part of this amazing program and to be partnering with the Makati Business Club. I was indeed very pleased and also overwhelmed with the warm reception that we got yesterday from our participants, and the participation has just been amazing. And we look forward to another amazing and interesting session today and this afternoon. I'll just probably share a brief story about CIPE and who we are and why we're working on FOI. Since 1983, CIPE has been working with local partners to craft business-driven solutions to support social economic endeavors that affect millions of people. We at CIPE believe that democracy is our strongest when the private sector is flourishing. Working with our local partners that include business associations, chambers of commerce, think tanks, universities, and advocacy organizations, we help create an enabling environment for business to thrive. We are one of the core institutes of the National Endowment for Democracy and an international affiliate of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. This can only happen when core institutes of democracy are strong and transparent. Currently, we operate in a global undertaking with 118 projects on the ground, all in different countries around the world, 64 countries to be exact, to build institutions and strengthen public-private cooperation and dialogue. And this is our mission and the core of our strength. Part of our strategic goals is to build resilient democracies and economies. That's why our focus points remain in terms of strengthening governance throughout the region, particularly here in Asia Pacific. This include combating corruption, strengthening rule of law, uh, enabling public financial management systems and structures, policy advocacy, think tank, capacity building, and business associations. And this is where we leverage our work on right to information and freedom of information. Across Southeast Asia, we know that the process of obtaining government information through transparent mechanism remains a challenge. Many countries in the region still lack anchor or national laws defining right to information or freedom of information, which is a crucial component for developing and maintaining public trust in government. Since the ability of government to provide accountable and clear access to all resources is very important, this helps build legitimacy for good governance. It is an area, right to information is an area that has become a focus for us in SIPE. And besides our work, our fine work with the Makati Business Club here in the Philippines, we also have ongoing initiatives in Sri Lanka through the Verite Institute and Maldives to Transparency Maldives to harness cooperation and strengthen programs that address access to government information and implementation of relevant right to information statutory laws or implementation of processes as well as advocating for better FOI or RTI mechanisms. SIPE's partnerships with these organizations have enabled to broadly has enabled broad support for citizens, entrepreneurs, business associations, and the general public in as far as creating more awareness as well as strengthening the advocacy premise to use FOI and RTI legislation as part of the dialogue process with the government. Specifically, our partnership with MBC is a very timely endeavor as we just launched SIPE's office here in Manila late last year as a hub for SIPE programming here in Asia Pacific region. As a hub, we foster knowledge sharing, project management, thought leadership, and stakeholder cooperation to respond to the emerging democracy landscape in the region. We support, apart from FOI, we support other themes and areas of cooperation in relation to women economic empowerment, anti-corruption and governance, trade facilitation, ethical and responsible investments, and infrastructure and procurement monitoring, as well as the gender diversity and inclusion and business association strengthening in the digital economy as part of our agenda here in the Philippines. We hope that through this partnership we have with MBC, we'll be able to grow and nurture more cooperation with different entities, civil society organizations, and business community so we can strengthen the desire and thrive to aspire for better progress in as far as our activities and our advancement here in the country. I'd like to incidentally share that apart from MBC, we also have currently a live project with the Philippines LGBT Chamber of Commerce to support the development of a comprehensive governance index that supports better policy environment for diversity and inclusion. And we're happy that with these two live programs that we currently have, and we're hoping and looking forward to more endeavors and projects to work with different partners in the future, we're able to hit the ground running with this timely activity. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge our speakers who have provided their time and expertise to be with us today. I think later on, USEC Chris Ablano has been a tremendous asset for our FOI sessions workshop since the beginning. Has such been a tremendous help, and we're always happy, and I'm always happy to see him and hear him listen. But also, I'd like to acknowledge our our speaker who will be following me, who has been a great inspiration to the youth and the general public through the efforts that he has undertaken, not just in his city, but also as a progressive leader in the country. Rightfully, I would like to extend on behalf of SITE our sincerest congratulations to you, Mayor Vico, on your on your most recent recognition as one of the 12 global champions of anti-corruption by the State Department. We're indeed privileged to have you and hear Pasig City's experience on FOI, which you also pioneered during your tenure as councillor. And in this regard, it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce Mayor Vico Soto, Mayor of Pasig City.
Hi, Sir Ryan. Thank you for that introduction. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. First of all, I'd like to congratulate and commend the Makati Business Club and all of the other organizations that are with us today, SIPE and all of the other organizations, for having a forum like this on the topic of freedom of information or FOI. It's not every day that we have a forum like this to talk about a very important topic that we don't talk about enough, really. You know, when I was asked to speak on the topic of FOI, specifically the experience of Pasig in passing it and eventually implementing it, napaisip ako, ay ko, parang parang ang tagal na, no? Nung parang ilang taon na yung nakalipas. Then I thought about it and I realized that it's only been 3 or 4 years since I passed the Freedom of Information Ordinance here in Pasig. But it feels like ages ago. It feels like a whole lifetime ago. So many things have changed since then. 2017 or 2018 yung Freedom of Information Ordinance. Yeah, I don't even remember the year anymore. That's how far it feels like, long ago it feels like. But and this is a topic that's very close to my heart, that's very important to me, and not because it's important to me per se, but because, you know, as the experts would say, as the political science would say, as the governance people would say, transparency is one of the 3 pillars of good governance, along with participation, citizen participation, and accountability, or yung pananagutan ng ating pamahalaan sa atin bilang mga mamamayan. And so this freedom of information is something that, you know, when we started fighting for it several years ago, obviously I was not a mayor then, I was a councillor. I introduced this ordinance in the Sangguniang Panlungsod. The first challenge was really trying to get people to understand how important this really is. How it would help us. Siyempre, sasabihin sa'yo ng iba, ano ba itong FOI na sinusulong mo? Ang dami nating ibang problema. Pag pinasabay yung pag naipasabay yung FOI na yan, dadami ba yung pagkain ko sa mesa ko? Magkakaroon ba ako ng trabaho pag nagkaroon ng FOI ordinance? Ano ba yung benepisyo nito? Ano ba yung makukuha ko dito? And that's really the biggest challenge. In my opinion. Secondary, pati ako na mute. That's the first challenge, and I think that's the most important challenge that yung kailangan natin pagtuunan ng pansin. Raising awareness, having fora, or having meetings like this, talking about it, getting more people, especially young people and young leaders involved. Realizing how important freedom of information is. I won't dwell on that too much because I feel like if you're in this forum right now, you probably know why this is important. I'm operating under that assumption. I hope I'm correct with that. Siguro kung hindi kayo naniniwala sa FY, hindi kayo kasama, hindi kayo nag-attend dito ngayon. So I won't dwell on that too much. I'd like to focus a little bit more on the experience. And I'll try my best not to eat up my whole time because I prefer to focus on the question and answer portion. Maybe that's where I can contribute a little more. So as I mentioned, the first challenge and the most important challenge that we pay attention to is getting people to understand why this is important. And then the second challenge, and I don't know, but maybe this is the more obvious challenge to people who are actually at the forefront fighting for, or the advocates of FOI, it may be a little bit more obvious. The second challenge is that there are those who don't want FOI. There are those who don't want a transparent government. Siguro yan din ang nature ng power. Kapag nasa poder ka, pag-iingatan mo talaga yun eh. Ayaw mong mawala ka sa poder eh. When you're in power, you don't want to lose that power, especially kung nandyan ka para kumita o magkaroon ng pera. Talagang ayaw mo magkaroon ng freedom of information. Ayaw mo maging transparent ang pamahalaan. Gusto mo, i-maintain yung patronage politics, yung system na ganun, para magbibigay lang ako ng konti sa mga tao. Akala nila okay na yun. Akala nila may natanggap na sila. Okay, tapos na ang kwento. Bako makukuha ko rin yung sa akin. Parang ganun. And so those challenges go hand in hand. And when I first introduced this ordinance in the city, obviously I wasn't alone in pushing for this. And if it was just me, hindi talaga maipapasa yun. But just to give kind of a picture of the situation, when I first introduced this ordinance in the city council, I was told, hindi ko na sasabihin kung sino nagsabi, kung ano yung posisyon, but I was told by some people within the local government, sabi sa akin, Councilor Vico, ba't pa ba kailangan yung FOI ordinance na yan? Hindi na natin kailangan yan. Transparent na naman tayo. So what I did was I conducted a little experiment. I engaged some of I have a batchmate who is now a professor at Ateneo, and I engaged some of his students through my professor friend. And I engaged 3 of their students to conduct a sort of mini experiment to request for documents. We requested for several documents. Not all were financial in nature, but kasama kunyari yung documents pertaining to the bids of a big project here in Pasig. Actually, it was the Pasig Sports Complex that is still undergoing construction. ₱1 billion project yun. So I asked for the documents for that. Hindi ako yung yung students yung humingi ng mga dokumento. And then we ask for a document or any program for mental health, and then several others. So after around a month of following up through phone, through email, following up in person, going to the various offices, engineering department, city administrator, mayor's office, they were passed around from one office to another. And at the end of the experiment, after around 2 months, we were able to get 0 out of 5 documents that we requested. And so I went back to the people who told me that we don't need this ordinance. I go, sabi niyo sa akin, transparent na tayo, hindi na natin kailangan ng FY ordinance. Bakit sa 5 dokumento na request ng mga mag-aaral na to, wala naman tayong nakuha? But I think one important thing that we need to realize, and people like me need to realize as well, is that pushing for good governance, whether it's FOI or really wala akong COVID, nasa mid lang. One thing that we really need to realize is that it's not enough to have champions in government. Although, of course, we want champions of good governance in government. We need people, whether councilors, senators, governors, etc. We need people in government, as many of them as we can find and we can put in office that will be champions of good governance. But the reality is, even if you have a mayor, even if you have a governor, and maybe even a president that is championing good governance, pro-FOI, the reality is this is not enough. Because the things that we're dealing with, the problems that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, the things that we see on the news, the bad governance or the inefficiencies in government, the corruption, yung katiwalian, yung graft na nakikita natin on a day-to-day basis. We see it on the news. We hear about it from our friends in government. We know it exists, whether big or small. the thing is, these problems are not just superficial problems. They're not just problems with an individual. It's not just because you have it's not as simple as corrupt kasi yung mayor, kaya corrupt yung nangyayari. It's not that simple. The reality is, the problems that we have today are very deeply institutionalized. They've been institutionalized over the last decades, the hundreds of years, going back to the Spanish, going back to the times when we were a colony. And they're very deeply rooted in our very culture. Ibig sabihin, kahit palitan mo lahat ng elected officials mo, bukas, bago mag-revolusyon tayo, bukas, papalitan na natin lahat ng opisyalis natin, lahat na hinalal ng tao. Ibig ba sabihin nun, wala nang corruption? No, probably the next week, it will just go back to the same. Because these problems are very institutionalized. Yung padrino system, yung palakasan system, the patronage politics, our weak party system. And we could go on and on. Yun kasi yung problema natin. It's very institutionalized. So what the point I'm trying to drive at is that, yes, we want government officials, we want to elect leaders that are trustworthy, that are yung sinasabi nating tapat at mahusay. But the reality is this is not enough. Sa political science, I was a political science major. As I see, I think we have some political science majors with us here today. But even if you're not political science, we have this concept or this thing that we call the bibingka strategy. Hindi ko alam kung meron po sa inyong marunong magluto ng bibingka. Ano? Lagi, mula nung bata ako, inaasar sa akin lagi, Biko, dahil Vico yung pangalan ko. Pero ang paborito kong kakanin, hindi biko, mas gusto ko yung bibingka. Why? Because yung bibingka, pag niluluto yan, dalawa yung apoy. There's a fire underneath and there's also a fire from above or on top. And if we really want to change our country for good, yung mga pagbabago na gusto natin ipakilala, hindi pwedeng top-down lang, hindi rin naman pwede na bottom-up lang. It needs to be a combination of both. The bibingka is the best analogy, I feel, the best example of this. And this is how we will really push for these positive changes. If we want to change our institutions slowly but surely, if we want to improve our governance, to improve transparency, improve the level of participation of the ordinary citizen and civil society, if we want to increase the level of accountability of our government to its people, to us, the ordinary citizen, kailangan meron tayong champions of good governance from within, from the top, yung mga nasa posisyon, nasa poder. Pero kailangan din civil society, kailangan din mga ordinaryong mamamayan, may push din from below. And for the Pasig experience in pushing for FYI, this is what happened. Hindi lang ako as councilor or may position yung nagtulak para sa mabuting panukala na ito or ordinansa na ito, freedom of information. But we had organizations from inside and outside Pasig that started to talk about it. Kumbaga, umingay ng konti lang. It wasn't a huge movement. It wasn't this huge organization with thousands and thousands of people. But we had people started getting interested. You know, we started talking about it on Facebook. Nagkaroon ng konting discussion. Nakita mo, mga ordinary citizens na hindi naman talaga interested sa politics pero nagsasabi, parang okay nga itong FYI. Dapat, ano ba tinatago ng gobyerno? May mga conversation na ganun. And as we started, getting the ball rolling, it became difficult for any one person or group to stop the FOI ordinance from passing. And I feel, of course, I can't really prove this, but I feel like because of this very small groundswell, again, it wasn't a huge movement, don't get me wrong. Maybe a few hundred people talking about it, a couple of organizations, several organizations. As it started gaining a little bit of traction, a little bit of attention, then parang, ano yan, kung hindi ipasa, kunyari, vinito yan, or hindi napasa sa sanggunian, hindi ba kasabihin ng tao, teka, ba't ayaw nyo yan? Baka may tinatago kayo. So, nag-iba yung narrative, nag-iba yung discussion, which allowed or paved the way for the passage of the FOI ordinance, or as it was called, the Transparency Ordinance. Marami nangyari, ganun, nagbago yung ano niya, but we made sure that the content remained the same. It would help us in the future. Of course, implementation is a whole different topic. I could spend 3 hours talking about this and how it wasn't implemented at first, and then eventually I ran for mayor, and then all of that. Pero ano yun, baka kahit kalahating araw hindi tayo matapos kung yan ang ikukwento ko. But again, the changes that we want to see, I know most of the people who are listening now or watching now, although I can't see you because we're doing this via Zoom, I know most of you are young people. Most of us here are young people. Probably, I'm one of the older people here at 31. I'm just guessing. But if we want to see those changes that we want to see within our lifetimes, and the chances of this are very high, na bago natin ipasa sa susunod pang henerasyon, na institutionalize na natin yung mga pagbabago. The best time to start acting on this is now. And this means, number one, preparing ourselves. Maghanda tayo. Kasama na dyan yung pag-aaral na mabuti. Pero yung pagsasanay din on the field, getting experience on the ground, not just in school or not just academics, has to be both. Whether it's through joining a non-government organization, civil society organization, engaging your barangay in its assemblies, finding ways to participate in our governance, in our day-to-day governance. No? Yung pakikilahok ng taong bayan sa paggugobyerno, unti-unti. Aligning ourselves with like-minded people who share the same principles, values, and beliefs. Then surely, as we move forward, lalakas yung puwersa ng mga naniniwala sa malinis, tapat, at mabuting paggugobyerno. And slowly but surely also, we will change our culture, the culture that we have normalized corruption, the culture where it's okay, these practices that we know are wrong, pero ayan na natin, mahirap labanan yan. Slowly, like pushing a giant wheel that maybe at first is very hard to push, very hard to move forward. But as we gain momentum, and again, as we prepare ourselves and we align ourselves with people who share the same principles, values, and beliefs, then we know that we will be able to break those negative practices and bad practices in our government. And slowly but surely, we will be able to see a Philippines run with good governance, run with transparency, participation, and accountability. So thank you. God bless us all. Again, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Mayor Vico. That new approach on governance is very interesting, no? Because we usually talk about bottom up and top to bottom, but now we have, I think, the Vivinka approach. Let's call it the Vivinka approach, where there's convergence. Since yun ang favorite ni Mayor, where there's convergence in the middle. Sabi nga ni Mayor, pakikilahok ng mga tao sa mga issue at pakikinig ng mga nasa posisyon. Thank you very much for that, Mayor Vico. Now let us move on to the questions. First question here, Mayor Vico, is from Paul Andre Rosette. He is from the Youth Parliamentarians of Laguna. Pasig City just recently convened its local youth development council as the LCE. How are you planning to involve in the youth sector and local governance practices and your program against corruption?
Updated yung nagtanong, kaka-election lang namin nung isang araw para sa LYDC namin, Local Youth Development Council. Number one, we take this very seriously, activating mechanisms for the participation of all citizens, but specifically the youth. The youth have great ideas that government officials have never thought of, or baka natatakot subukan. Pero ang kabataan kasi, ang bilis lang ng mga ideya sa kanila, ang bilis dumarating ng mga ideya sa kanila. And we need to really engage them and seriously include them, not just token participation. In the past, and if you look at other, a common practice is, sige, mag-eleksyon eh. Sabi sa batas, kailangan mag-eleksyon eh. Gagawa tayo ng local youth development plan. Pero ang tanong, makabuluhan ba talaga yung pakikilahok nila? Or, sinabi lang ba ng pamahalaan na, sige, kailangan kasi, pero sige, okay, pirma na lang kayo, tapos na. Is it just going to be a token form of participation, or is it going to be a meaningful engagement, between the government and the young people. So, my job as mayor is to really open things up. Kayo mag-suggest. Hindi ako magsasabi kung anong gagawin ninyo. I can provide you with some maybe capacity development. I can maybe nudge you in the direction that we think is good. But ultimately, yung kabataan dapat, yung mga naging miyembro ng LYDC with our sangguniang kabataan, sila na dapat magsabi. My job is just to empower. Kung saan makarating yun, kung saan pumunta yun, ano yung gusto nilang tutukan, that should be their decision and their decision alone. Maybe a little bit of budgetary support, pero hanggang dun lang dapat ako, hindi dapat ako magdikta. Kahit yung local youth development plan mismo, actually we engaged our organizations here as it should be to really, kayo mag-identify, ano ba yung nakikita niyong problema? Healthcare, edukasyon, peace and order, kayo magsabi. At ano rin yung nakikita niyong solusyon? And then let's see what we can do from there. Again, just a lot of these things are actually already in our laws. Nasa local government code to. Meron tayong SK Reform Act. We have other laws pertaining to this. But are we really going to take it seriously and empower the youth? Or are we going to just, hold back a little bit na, ano lang, kung ano yung nakasulat, yun lang. So that's the question there. And for us, we really want to try to empower the youth.
Webinar, si Vico Soto.
Thank you very much, Mayor Vico. Yes po, we are with Mayor Vico Soto. The next question is from Andrea Tarusan from UP Diliman. Good afternoon, Mayor. Does freedom of information means complete transparency per se? There are a lot of aspects that information is too sensitive. How will you and other authorities deal with that?
Freedom of information is not absolute. Isang halimbawa, security plan para sa evacuation in case of a terrorist attack. Alam nga naman i-publish ko yun. Edi alam na nung terorista kung saan siya pupunta at kung saan kami, anong gagawin namin. So there are certain things that, matters of national security, sa intelligence, hindi yan absolute. So, but the question is, hanggang saan? Kasi I before I filed the FYI ordinance, I studied a lot of different FOI laws from Europe and I even went to the States to do this. And I saw one of the problems, particularly the state of Iowa sa US. Ang nakita namin, sinasabi din ng Public Information Board nila, yun yung parang FOI board nila. Ang nangyari, over the years, dumami yung exceptions. Na parang 100 na yung exceptions nila. So, I worked with them to see ano ba talagang kailangan i-narrow down natin, and I came up with 9 exceptions that you can find in the Transparency Ordinance here in Pasig. Syempre biased ako kasi ako yung nagsulat, but I feel like it's yung pinaka-condensed na yon na posible, na hindi mo naman sinakripisyo yung national security or safety of people and their privacy. So halimbawa, medical records. You can get yung totals nun or per sector, pero hindi mo pwede tingnan ano yung ni Miss Alex, ano yung sakit ni Miss Alex, pwede ko ba i-request yun through FOI, ano ba yung medical condition ni Miss Alex, bawal yun. We respect the privacy, but the guiding principle here is, number one, we're just talking about security and safety, but the overarching principle is privacy is for the citizen, transparency is for the government. So when there is doubt, when there is ambiguity, pag tungkol sa individual, privacy. Pero pag tungkol sa pamahalaan, sa paggugobyerno at pamamalakad natin, transparency as a general principle. Pero tingin ko sa ngayon, di muna natin kailangan pag-usapan yan kasi dapat pinag-usapan muna natin yung passage mismo ng FOI law. Wag muna yung exceptions.
Thank you very much for that, Mayor Vico. The next question is from John Christopher Cruz. Being one of the 12 global anti-corruption champions by the U.S. State Department, how can you use this award to inspire more politicians to pass the FOI bill in our country? We see the change in Pasig and we congratulate you for a job well done.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yung mga recognition naman na ganyan ay, well, of course, it's, I appreciate it and I'm very thankful, but I hope that it doesn't end there. Kasi kung mabibigyan lang ako ng parangal tapos natapos na yun, para saan ba yun? Ano bang napala natin dun? Parang wala naman. But kung makakuha ako ng parangal and it sparks a little bit of discourse when it comes to corruption and anti-corruption, if it helps and is somehow a catalyst in talking about this, because like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the problems that we have are very deeply ingrained and deeply rooted in our culture. So ibig sabihin, kung gusto natin siyang baguhin sa mas mabilis na panahon, kailangan pag-usapan natin. Yun yung first step. Hindi natin mababagong isang bagay na ayaw nating harapin. So let's talk about it. What can we do? What is happening? Ano pa yung mga practice na tinanggap natin sa tagal ng panahon pero hindi talaga dapat? So I hope that somehow it sparks the discussion a little bit.
Thank you very much, Mayor Vico. Next question is from Carnina Galeno. Is it possible to have FOI also in the barangay? This is very interesting, or kahit training lang po sa mga SK. Maganda po kasing training ito for them. And kailangan po bang merong FOI muna ang LGU bago magkaroon ng FOI sa barangay?
Ang barangay is an autonomous local government unit. So pwede yan. Kung may kapitan ka at may sangguniang pambarangay na naniniwala sa FOI, pwede nila gawin to on their own. Just like the city can do it without the province can do it without the national. So ganun din yung principle dito. Maganda yung suggestion na magkaroon ng mga training, whether or not there's an existing ordinance or law pertaining to this. Perhaps the FOI unit of the PCO through ASEC Ablan could help with this. Kasi actually before ECQ, nagka-caravan sila for FOI, which I really appreciated. Nakarating din sila sa Pasig, Capitolio High School. So baka gusto niyong tanungin si ASEC mamaya.
Thank you, Mayor. There's just another follow-up from Cyrene Roque, again of UP. Mayor, what are some of the ways that the youth can start or push for FOI in their local communities?
Okay. One of the things that you could do is to join an organization that believes in FOI. Start talking to your councilors if you have access. Push for it, lobby for it, talk about it, post about it on social media. Ang dami natin. Again, these are small. It might be baka ma-discourage tayo kasi parang ano ba magagawa ng isang post sa Facebook? Ano bang magagawa nito? And I understand that feeling. Sometimes it can be a little bit discouraging. Parang ano ba yung nangyari sa effort ko? But again, bibingka approach. Okay lang yun. Kahit feeling mo walang nangyayari from the bottom up, eventually makahanap rin kayo ng partner na champion ng FOI or champion ng good governance and transparency in governance. So that's actually another thing, another thing that we can do. Let's identify leaders who believe in this and help them whether they're in office now, and help them pass it. Talk to them about it. Kung wala pa naman, edi maghanap kayo ng leader in the future who would believe in it as well.
Just to follow up on that, Mayor Vico, I would like to ask po, what was the role of the youth in Pasig City when you were, pushing for and championing for the passage of your own ordinance?
Malaki naging role ng mga kabataan. Again, I don't want to ano ba tawag dito? Parang over-report to you kung ano yung nangyari. Hindi ko sinasabi na grabe, sobrang daming tao. Hindi naman, I don't want to exaggerate like that. But the role of the youth was also crucial, even on social media. And then eventually, we had a Youth for FOI Alliance. So yung mga, little things, when you add them up together, it becomes really big.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a question from Philip Luis Embate, one of our partners from the Young Centrists Union. Since you've mentioned that you have studied various FOI laws from around the world, from which country did you get inspiration for Pasig City's FOI ordinance and why?
Okay, well, una kong inaral yung naging FOI EO ni Presidente Duterte, which has a lot of good points to it. And then, I started. The first FOI law comes from Sweden. 1700s, hindi ko alam kung 1766 or 1670. Basta parang gano'n. Hindi ko na maalala exactly. But, and then from there, it spread throughout the world. But yung mas naaral ko in depth and in practice, because I was there, was the one in Iowa State in the United States. And yung Iowa Public Information Board, as I mentioned, they helped me with specifically with the exceptions based on their experience. Tapos inano ko na lang, parang inadapt na lang natin or tiningnan natin para sumuwak din siya sa konteksto ng Pilipinas. Pero marami na around the world. Mag-Google lang, makikita mo naman yung mga we can compare. Importante magkaroon.
This question is from Cheska Arla Agrupes, Mayor. Does Pasig have data on the number of its constituents who have availed of the benefits of the FOI ordinance? What are the usual information that they ask for and for what purpose?
That's a very interesting question, and I don't have the exact numbers. It has been utilized by some of our citizens. Alam niyo, pagdating sa pagkuha kasi ng impormasyon, kumbaga iba-ibang level din yan ng appreciation eh. Yung unang level of appreciation is may kailangan ako sa gobyerno ko, hindi ko nakukuha o hindi ko alam paano makuha, magtatanong ako. So we established a unit called the Ugnayan sa Pasig. Dito sa Ugnayan sa Pasig, hindi lang siya strictly FOI. Kasama na rin dito yung feedbacks, complaints, monitoring system natin. So, kumbaga pinagsama-sama natin siya. Kasi kung FOI, strictly FOI ang pag-uusapan natin, aminin natin, hindi pa naman ganun ka, kumbaga, ask 100 people, what does FOI mean? Swerte ka na kung may 5 makasagot in a technical way. Pero, kung gagawin natin to na, okay, don't even need to mention the phrase FOI. Nabukas lang ang gobyerno, magreklamo sila, pakikinggan sila ng gobyerno, hindi magagalit yung mga nakaupo. Pakikinggan sila, tutugunan natin yung mga concern ninyo. Kung may feedback sila, maganda man o hindi, pag po naman yan, pakikinggan sila at aaksyonan. So kung yun yung pag-uusapan natin, this is used hundreds of times in a week. So again, pinagsama-sama natin yun. FOI, complaints, and general feedback.
Thank you, Mayor. Another question. Good afternoon po, Mayor. Salamat po sa hopeful sharing. I'm interested po on the strategies that Pasig used to encourage the citizens to participate in policy making. For example, in the FOI ordinance. From our experience on ground, doing community work, community members tend to think that people in the academe, organizations, or the governments are the experts, and active participation takes time. Salamat po. This is from Jeremiah Silvestre.
Well, an important point to make here is that in Pasig, we are just starting. Hindi, kung maghahanap kayo talaga ng, kunyari, best practice or model for citizen participation in governance, hindi pa kami yun. We're still, I feel like we're still miles ahead, but I also feel that we're on the right direction. So we started with the mechanisms and processes that are mandated by law. Kumbaga, hindi ka naman pwede magtayo ng 30-story building na hindi ka nagsimula sa pundasyon at sa ground level. We have to start from the bottom up in terms of building. Kailangan solido muna yung pundasyon natin. So before we get fancy with establishing a sectoral council that's fully working, very active citizen participation, siguraduhin muna natin na yung local special bodies natin properly selected yan among civil society organizations. Let's make sure that we have a good straightforward accreditation process for our NGOs na madali lang at nagagawa natin kung ano yung nakasaad sa batas. It's easy to think of, dami-dami na natin naisip, pero yung pinaka-basic pala, which is accreditation and selection to the local special bodies, nakalimutan pala natin o hindi natin nagawa ng maayos. Kasi kami dito sa Pasig, dati hindi ito nagagawa. Kahit nasa batas na siya, hindi siya nagagawa dati. Ang selection to the local special bodies before, sasabihin lang ng mayor, and this is not to discredit anyone, pero ito lang talaga yung reality. Before, sabihin na mayor, itong organization ABC, ikaw yung member dito sa Local Peace and Order Council. So it's, trying to change that. Accreditation, you choose amongst yourselves. Hindi ako yung mamimili. Whether kakampi ko yan, kaalyado, o nakaaway dati, okay lang. Basta kayo mamili. Sino yung representante ninyo? In accordance, strict accordance with the law and the mechanisms provided for by law. And then once we get that down, we can go to the next level. Try natin mag sectoral council tayo. Dun pa lang sa drafting ng budget, kasama na kayo. So unti-unting pagbubukas ang ginagawa namin. Hindi agad-agad. Kasi ano rin yan eh. Dalawang bahagi yan eh. Kailangan magkasabay at nagsasalubong. Una, yung side ng mamamayan, meron din yan capacity building involved. Kasi kung never mo pa naman nagagawa, tapos biglang pinasok ka dyan sa budgetary process natin or budget deliberations process, mawawala ka din, hindi mo rin alam kung anong gagawin mo eh. Ano yung babantayan ko dito? Ano yung paano kala ko dito? Hindi ko na alam kung ano to eh. So kailangan may capacity building din. The other side of the flip side of that is the government. Baka hindi rin pahanda yung gobyerno na agad-agad kasama na nila yung civil society at every step of the way. We have people, they've been in government for 20, 30 years, but first time nila ma-experience na habang nagda-draft ako ng budget, may katabi akong civil society organization. So this is new to them as well. So hindi pwedeng bigla, but kailangan malinaw kung paano tayo mag phase by phase or step by step, level per level, building on the previous level, slowly but surely, hanggang sa hopefully, in a couple of years we see, okay, Pasig, good example for citizen participation. But again, I'm saying we're not there yet. But we believe we have a solid roadmap to get there in the shortest amount of time possible.
Thank you, Mayor. The next question would be given by the Philippine Director of Center for International Private Enterprise, Mr. Ryan Evangelista.
Mayor, good afternoon again, and I'm very thankful for the very insightful ideas you've given and also the inspiration to the youth. My question, and a couple of them, if you'll allow me, when you're into the pandemic, and I see in the news that Pasig was one of those first responders in terms of LGU activities and initiatives. How do you think the FOI or even touch points with the society, with your public in Pasig, has enabled you to construct the proper policies or the proper response to COVID-19? And as a follow-up to that, in terms of doing business and also promoting business enabling environment in Pasig, I mean, you said very young pa yung law natin right now, or yung ordinance natin right now, but have you seen some sort of some good feedback or insights coming from the private sector on how useful the law is in as far as creating that enabling environment for Pasig? I mean, Pasig has always been a hotspot anyway for investments, but has it triggered more interest from private sector investors and particularly small, medium enterprises or entrepreneurs to because of this laws or ordinances on FOI?
Okay, so Ryan, thank you for that insightful question. So the first part, as it relates to our pandemic response, hindi ko na kayo bubulahin. I feel like, well, it should be someone else to really assess that. Ayoko man sabihin na I'm not sure, pero I'm not sure. Kasi, especially nung ECQ, nung nagsisimula tayo dito sa pandemic response natin, talagang, for the lack of a better term, panic mode yan eh. This crisis is something that none of us have experienced before. None of us have experienced a worldwide pandemic. Even if you are a senior citizen, this hasn't happened in the last 100 years. So, napakahirap din i-assess kung maganda pa talaga yung response namin. But the important thing is that we were able to adapt along the way. So hindi man talaga perfect yung response ng kahit anong LGU or kahit anong gobyerno sa buong mundo. But what's important is that as we got data, as we consulted with the experts, we were able to adapt and move around. So if the question is how did FOI help, I would have to think about that more in depth and really analyze it. Hindi ko alam paano sagutin at this point. Kasi at the point na mamadali ka yun talaga yung nangyari. Wala naman nagtatanong nun wala naman naghahanap ng information nun, sa totoo lang kasi panic mode yan, nagmamadali lahat. The second part of your question with regard to the private sector and businesses, hopefully, maybe our friends from the Makati Business Club would be able to give a better answer. But I feel like it's helped, and it's helped improve the climate or conditions for becoming more business friendly in Pasig. Again, I feel like we're just starting. 1 or 2 years is really not enough to change the culture of governance. Meron pa rin dyan sa baba na umihingi ng lagay at nagfi-fixer. Hindi pa yan 100%. If we want to really fix it and we're serious about fixing it and cleaning things up, we have to acknowledge where our weaknesses are. Hindi pwede magkunwari tayo na okay na, nagbago na lahat. Hindi, that's not a good approach. We need to be realistic, pragmatic, and admit where our weaknesses and but at the same time, I believe that we've made a lot of progress. Sa pagbubukas pa lang ng bidding, ask any contractor who's tried to engage our bidding process. Ngayon, wala nang harang sa kanila pag bibili sila ng bid docs. They can bid sa lowest qualified bidder, mananalo ka dito. Ganun lang kasimple. So, these little things, well, actually, that's not a little thing, but these things help, with the business environment in Pasig, trying to make things, trying to streamline. Too many to mention, baka maging masyadong mahaba yung sagot ko. But definitely, and siguro one last point on this question is that sometimes the value of having a freedom of information ordinance or law is not with the FYI requests per se. Although of course, kung may gusto ka makitang dapat open, pero minsan it's just the fact that you have the mechanism and that your government is transparent. Yun pa lang, kahit hindi ka na mag-request, medyo mapapanatag yung loob mo. And the analogy that I always use here is that of a kitchen. Kunyari, kakain ka sa isang kainan. Kapag sarado yung ayaw magpasilip ng chef, pwede ko ba tingnan kung paano nyo niluluto yung pagkain? Hindi, bawal. Hindi ba? Maaring malinis yung pagkain, pero hindi mo alam, magdududa ka na. Pero kung glass wall yung kitchen at nakikita mo kung paano magluto yung mga chef at cook, parang okay yan. Sigurado ka malinis yan kasi wala silang tinatago, transparent. Glass yung wall. Kung may ginawa sila, kung may madumi silang ginagawa dyan, may kita ko. So, pwede hindi ko na tingnan. Alam ko naman transparent. So, again, that is the value of having an FY law. It's like having a kitchen that has a glass panel for a wall. And that's really the biggest, for me, the value in this. And then, of course, as people request, dapat ibigay talaga para hindi naman kunyari lang yung FOI.
Thank you very much, Mayor Vico, and thank you, Ryan. Mayor, there is a question here from Rosario Pasig.
Mm-hmm.
She is Benica. Her question is, Mayor, how can we use the FOI in Pasig to encourage citizen participation in government affairs? I messaged my SK about the minutes of their meeting last session, but they did not reply. How do I assert my right to information then in terms of being more involved in our community development? Thank you po.
Well, that's a really great effort. Nag-request for the minutes of the meeting. Unfortunately, yung FY ordinance sa city level, hindi niya talaga sakop yung barangay affairs at yung SK. So maganda rin sana meron sa barangay level. But there are so many ways that we can engage our government. Once your SK convenes its KK, katipunan ng mga kabataan, sali kayo doon. Kung wala, punta kayo sa barangay assembly niyo, sabihin niyo, bakit walang nagko-convene na KK dito? Siyempre, extreme na magpa-file ng kaso. Sana hindi naman umabot sa ganun. But that's their duty and responsibility to convene the KK. The LYDC we just opened. You can get yourself accredited if you have an organization. Maluwag na maluwag yung requirements for an organization. Di nga kailangan ng SEC registration or anything. Basta legitimate organization, i-accredit yan ng city. So find ways Mga kabataan, di naman kayo mauubusan ng paraan eh. Be creative. Find ways to participate, engage your local government.
Thank you, Mayor. We know that you're very busy. Last two questions here in our queue po. This is from Madeline from We the Future PH. Together with the DILG, how do good practices such as the Pasig's FOI policies spark or inspire other LGUs to improve their transparency and accountability measures? Do LGUs coordinate for this?
On the topic of FOI, do LGUs coordinate? I don't think we've really talked about it, to be honest, to be very blunt with man. Hindi naman namin masyado na pag-uusapan. Siguro kasi ang dami ring ibang issues na pressing, ganyan. But, you know, again, yung bibingka strategy, bibingka approach, this is not an original idea of mine. This is 1998 pa, si Professor Boreas po yata. I can't remember exactly, but this is a concept from 1998, the bibingka strategy or bibingka approach. And this is really something that we should, you know, consider. Again, sali kayo sa organizations, sali kayo or align yourselves with like-minded people, engage your government officials, find champions na, you know, sabi nating top-down din. Eventually, you know, more and more LGUs will have this. More and more LGUs will have the good practices, not just of FOI. This is just one thing, you know, but transparency in general and good governance in general.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the last question for this afternoon. What are some of the key lessons that you learned in trying to push for the FOI ordinance as well as anti-corruption efforts in general from the bottom up? What are some of the top challenges you see for the Philippines as you try and champion anti-corruption efforts?
Well, I think I already mentioned it, but just to repeat very briefly, one lesson learned really is that no one person can do this alone. Whether as a councilor before or as a mayor now, yung mga pagbabagong gusto natin isulong, hindi ko kaya yan mag-isa. Kaya again, at the risk of sounding very repetitive, yung bibingka strategy na kailangan both from the top down and bottom up. Ano? Yung pinakamalaking challenge naman talaga ay nabanggit na rin natin, ano, na yung mga bagay-bagay na mali pero gusto natin baguhin, nakaugat na to sa kultura at pag-gobyerno natin. Institutionalized ito. Systems of corruption, even kickbacks in government, they're institutionalized. And sometimes it's harder to, baga, kung sasabihin mo, pag sinita mo yan, minsan ikaw pa yung parang masama because it's so institutionalized and so deeply ingrained in our culture. Pag sinabi mo, ba't may ganyan? Ba't may kickback? Baka ikaw pa yung magmukhang masama pa minsan pag nasa loob ka. Again, because it's so normal, it's so institutionalized, it's in our culture. Kaya kailangan i-denormalize natin, kailangan basagin natin yung mga ganong pag-iisip. At ako naniniwala ako yung kabataan talaga Once our nation has raised a new generation of people who don't just accept these practices but really want to challenge it and will not participate in it. Kahit ano pang sabihin ng mga nakaupo, wala na silang magagawa. But we need to start with ourselves, start with our friends, our families, start with the young generation. And eventually the tide will shift.
Thank you very much, Mayor Vico, for your time. Just would like to request po for your last words to our participants this afternoon, to the youth who are very much interested in passing the FOI law.
Last words for this forum, ano? Hindi pa naman ako mamamatay, but
yes, po.
To the young people who are with us right now in this forum, first of all, thank you. The fact that you're here shows that you're interested in good governance, FOI, and it will really be our generation or your generation that is going to change things in our country. There are good people from all generations, don't get me wrong, but if we really want to change the culture, it will be up to us to push for those changes. Don't be frustrated at slow developments. Let's be patient, but also let's have a sense of urgency and balance. Let's keep pushing and pushing and pushing Just like the analogy of a great giant wheel, if you push by yourself, let's say a wheel that's 30 feet tall, probably nothing is going to budge. Kung dalawa na kayo nagtutulungan, maaaring hindi pa rin yan gagalaw. Kung 10 na kayo, baka gumalaw na yan ng 1 inch. And then as we study it and see ano bang pwedeng gawin, baka pwede tali natin dito, hilain natin dito, magkaroon ng lever dito, tanggalin natin yung harang dito, strategize tayo, we get smarter, we get better, we get more people involved, we get organizations involved, and maybe that wheel will start to move a little bit. Those changes we want to see, uusad na yan ng konti. And then habang dumadami tayo, tumatalino tayo, gumagaling tayo, nagiging mas mahusay tayo sa mga changes na gusto natin makita, baka bumilis ng konti yung paggulong ng gulong na yun. And as that wheel starts to move a little faster, a little faster, a little faster, it builds a little bit of momentum, a little more momentum. Eventually, it will come to a point that if you go on the other side and actually try to stop that wheel from moving, ikaw yung madudurog. So we just need to keep pushing, let's be smart and strategize about it, but we need to keep pushing for that change until we see na momentum na siya at hindi na mapipigilan yung mga pagbabago na yun. So thank you again for having me. It was great to spend my the last hour with you. Let's not get frustrated, but let's keep pushing for those positive changes. Thank you everyone.
Thank you very much, Mayor Vico. It's truly an honor to have you here in our workshop. To know more about Pasig City's FOI, our participants may check out the Pasig City Ordinance and other resolutions on their website and even request for an FOI in Ugnayan sa Pasig. Again, thank you very much, Mayor Vico. All right, moving forward. Moving forward in our workshop, on behalf of MBC, including our Executive Director, Coco Alcoas, who joins us today, thank you, Mayor Vico, for gracing us with your time today. Again, we encourage the participants to tweet and post your FYI on FOI experience. That's a very interesting discussion with Mayor Vico just now. No? So we hope that you tweet and tag your friends, tag your representatives on Facebook and Twitter, and use our official hashtag FYI on FOI, hashtag MBC for FOI, and hashtag PassFOI now. Now to start the workshop for day 2, let me call on our facilitator for today. He is a Doctor of Public Administration from UP National College of Public Administration and Governance. He is also a board member at the Philippine Society for Public Administration, policy consultant at the Office of Senator Risa Ontiveros, and the current Dean of the School of Diplomacy and Governance of De La Salle College of St. Benilde. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Gary Ador Junicio.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon to our participants, to our organizers, and esteemed guests. First, let me greet everyone a happy Women's Month, to our students, youth leaders, business leaders, political leaders, and all the stakeholders. And second, I'm honored and privileged to be part of this very important gathering to share my thoughts on the importance of freedom of information in this time of pandemic. And of course, in the era where democracy has been challenged and being battered by autocrats and illiberal democracy. I'm also honored to speak after Mayor Vico Soto, who was awarded recently by the US State Department as one of the awardees of International Anti-Corruption Champion. I remember 2 years ago, I personally met and visited Mayor Vico in his office to invite him to be one of the board of advisors of the School of Diplomacy and Governance and Public Affairs. I invited him not because of his popularity, but due to his innovative, dynamic, and up-to-date programs in the city of Pasig. And I really wanted that these programs will be learned and be benchmarked by our students. Anyway, I want to thank MBC for inviting me here, especially to Mr. Coco Alcoas, Executive Director of MBC, as well as to Mr. Ryan Evangelista and to the staff. Thank you. Today, I was tasked to facilitate and discuss FOI for youth and our students. So I entitled my lecture and workshop this afternoon as Making Development and Business Work Through the Freedom of Information. So by the way, the title I inspired from a famous book written by a political scientist by the name Robert Putnam, when he wrote a book titled Making Democracy Work. So please allow me to share with you my this afternoon's presentation. Oh, Alex, can that be a host, or you want to, because I made some adjustment in my presentation. You want to share na lang?
I think, Dean, you can share your screen now.
Okay. Okay.
Can you please try it again?
For a while. So, okay, here we go. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, this is my title, Making Development and Business Work Through Freedom of Information. As an outline, I have here 6 parts, 6 interrelated parts that will guide our participants, no, to be able to understand how information is very essential in terms of making development and business work together. So first, I will share my intended learning outcomes, which means at the end of this presentation, what are the key learnings or thoughts that our participants would be generated from this presentation. Second, of course, we talk about the introduction or the overarching political milieu right now. When you talk about democracy, you talk about information. Third, what I'm going to do is, through the help of varieties of democracy, who did a study on the different levels of democracy, I'll give you some current, what do you call this, no? Situation of democracy at glance. Then fourth, we'll look at the development, business, and information. And 5, I will invite everyone, especially who are here, to share their thoughts, no, on why FOI is a key for the development and business and democratic empowerment. And last but not the least, I will do a summary, no, and conclusion with regard to this presentation. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, there are these 3 interrelated intended learning outcomes that I made for this presentation. Number 1 is to discuss the current trends and developments of democracy at the global level, emphasize the value of freedom of information and business in development and business, and 3, critically examine the importance of democratic institutions in achieving development. So as an introduction, let me share you this, that freedom is very important component of development. This was already stated, no, in a Nobel Peace Prize book written by Amartya Sen on development as freedom. Especially this time of COVID-19 pandemic, I believe that people should have a choice. People should be really informed, and people should be involved as well, no, in terms of policy making. Second, I think while we are experiencing the so-called pandemic, let's also look at, let's try to examine how and why our democracy is dying at this day and age. Why all of a sudden we notice the rise of the so-called strong men or the populist leaders, no, who try to capture some values and ideas that we used to cherish in the past. This doesn't mean that the previous model of democracy is no longer working or failed the majority of the people, or there's a need, alternative mode, no, of system of government, or perhaps a mode of democracy that people will try to embrace now. And third is probably give my final share on what I believe that in terms of making development and business work, freedom of information is very much needed. Okay, so to continue, let us look at what's happening right now globally. So look at the democracy at glance. No? First of all, what we are witnessing right now are the so-called rise of autocratization. When say about autocratization, it means the decline of democratic traits that accelerates in the world. According to varieties of democracy, for the first time since 2001, autocracies are in majority, about 92 countries, home to about 54% of the global population, while almost 35% of the world population live in autocratizing nations. So, and I try to be more specific on that number, there are about 2.6 billion people living in this type of government. And first time in the history of the of the European Union that they had a member, no, which is a non-democracy member, and that is Hungary, no, led by Viktor Orban, no, who now is being classified as an electoral authoritarian regime. While there are about 20 for major G20 nations and all regions of the world are part of the so-called third wave of autocratization, this is to some extent a reverse of what Samuel Huntington's third wave of democracy. We are now experiencing the so-called third wave of autocratization. It's really affecting large number of people, like in Brazil, in India, the United States, and Turkey, which are major economies with a sizable population exercising substantially for global military, economic, and political influence. And the virus is spreading of autocracy, and they're going back to Latin America, which in the past, Latin America trying to capture some democratic revolutions. And at the same time, there's now cases in Eastern Europe and Central Asia who are basically being affected by this so-called autocratization. And India, which is considered as the largest democratic country in the world, is now on the verge of losing its status of democracy due to the severely shrinking space of media and civil society and the opposition under Prime Minister Modi's government, because of his BJP party. And another surprising, of course, development brought by this autocratization is basically the attacks of freedom of expression. And media freedom are now affecting about 31 countries compared to 19, 2 years ago. So there are also some problems in terms of clean elections. We also experience some media censorship and repression of civil society. In record for about 37 countries and 11 more than the 26 states currently affected by severe autocratization. So all the manifestations of curtailing rights and information and even democratic participation are really being affected because of the rise of so-called autocratic leadership. Now, before the so-called emergence of this autocratic leaders or populist leaders, if I may use that term, let's do some cursory look of democracy prior on that, democracy revisited. Well, if we ask you what is democracy, of course, there are thousands of definitions of what is democracy. You can go back as old from the time of Plato and Aristotle, but to simply put it, and for the lack of time, I've only here at least indicated four working indicators of what democracy should look like. First, it's a system of government in which people can choose and replace leaders. It's also a component of freedom, where information, press, freedom of information, freedom of the press, associations, belief, and religions are available. Democracy also involves protection from the government overreaching power. So that's give us the privacy and the right, to have our ownership and the right of expression. And of course, I think one of the last important indicators of what democracy is it should have a strong and dynamic working institution. The late political scientist Samuel Huntington basically did a scholarly work on the development of democracy. So he called that the wave of democratization. So we have the first wave of democratization that officially began in 1828, although in US political system, it's still debatable because some says that US democracy really happened when the segregation law was really aborted and people were given a chance to vote. And that was about in 1968. And of course, it's also the time when Western Europe tried to embrace the idea of democratization. The second wave of democratization, according to Huntington, basically happened after World War II, when democracy was restored mostly to Western European countries. And also it happened in Japan and in Turkey. In the same time, the second wave of democratization also includes the arrival of new democracies and quasi-democracy because of the decolonialization. You see, for example, that colony countries, like particularly UK at that time, France and Germany, and among others, try now to decolonize. They used to become territorial states. So you have now India, Ghana, New Zealand, and so on and so forth. And third wave of democratization, as mentioned by Huntington, is that it happened in 1974 when the so-called Carnation Revolution in Portugal and the Spanish transition in 1970 dramatically changed Europe, these are against military regime, and also spread in Latin America and also in Asia Pacific, including Philippines, South Korea, Taiwan, Eastern Europe, with the collapse of Eastern Europe, with the collapse of the Soviet regime and the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and the Soviet Union and the Sub-Saharan Africa beginning in 1989. So what I'm saying is that why did I presented the so-called this wave of democratization is because democracy did not happen overnight. People fought for it, people struggled for it, and people fight for it, through constitutional and extra-constitutional means. So it did not happen overnight. It's like a low-hanging fruit that people tend to get. The fight for democracy has something to do with changing the institution, changing the mindset, and of course, changing the leadership. And it was sad because what we're witnessing right now is the reverse. And what we're seeing right now is the so-called the creeping autocracy. As I mentioned earlier, just to give you more emphasis on what I earlier presented. So again, the autocracies are really in the majority, and that's first time, about 54% in our global population. And it's sad that illiberal democracy right now, as started and promoted by Viktor Orban of Hungary, is now becoming more popular in Eastern Europe. So it's like spreading in Slovakia, in Poland, and among other countries. And India, really, as I mentioned earlier, because of BJP's, the party of Modi's idea of to curtail the freedom, not only of the expression of political thoughts, but also of religion in India, because they try to promote what to call this Hinduism, in India, rather than tolerating other religion. We're experiencing this also type of autocratic cases. And for the record, as I mentioned, almost 35% of world's population, or 2.6 billion, 8% live under the regimes becoming more democratic. It's only getting more and more slimmer. And Central Europe and Central Asia is worse affected by the autocratization. Turkey lost its status as democracy in 2014 under the leadership of Recep Erdogan, since it descended into the bottom 20%. And the US, especially during the election of former President Donald Trump, also suffering a substantial autocratization. And even Trump has been out of the office, he left a lot of autocratic residues that people tend to believe from his conspiracy theories. Now, there's a playbook. It's the so-called playbook, or the key indicators of how this behavior happen. Let me share with you, because you might identify how these things unfold. Because as I mentioned earlier, autocratic regime, or the creeping autocratization, also did not happen overnight. Perhaps what they claim is that the rise of autocracy right now is due to the fact that the promise of liberal democracy to provide prosperity for all did not materialize. The chances where there will be an equal footing, or a so-called same degree of opportunity also have been problematic. So political scientists by the name of Levitsky and Ziblatt identified 4 indicators on their famous book, How Democracy Dies, where the so-called autocracy happened. So what are these key indicators? Number 1 is rejection, or commitment to democratic rules of the game. When you talk about rejection to democratic rules of the game, I think the fundamental concern is that, are they willing to change the Constitution because they believe the Constitution is no longer in accordance with the will of the people? Or they do suggest some anti-democratic measures that will curtail the rights of the people, even canceling elections or suspending some part of the Constitution? And we talk about number 2, the denial of legitimacy of political opponents. Do they subscribe their opponents as simply subversives or enemy of the state? Number 3, toleration and encouragement of violence. Do they have ties, armed gangs, or paramilitary forces, militias, and guerrillas in terms of an organization, or they have a partisan allies sponsored to encourage mob attacks in the opponents. And number four, in terms of the readiness to curtail civil societies and curtail civil liberties of opponents, including the media information, are they supporting laws or policies that restrict civil liberties, such as expanded libel or defamation, or law restricting protests, criticism, and government or certain civic and political organization? These are basically the four steps that identified by Levitsky and Ziblatt, no, of how this autocratic regime surfaced and emerged. In addition, there's also a book entitled by Illwins, written by a famous liberal democratic scholar by the name of Larry Diamond, and he identified the 12-step program, no, on how also the playbook of a liberal democracy and autocratic regime surfaced and emerged. First, he said that the so-called leader of this autocratic regime begin to demonize the opposition and claiming that the opposition are illegitimate and unpatriotic and part of the discredited or loyal disestablishment and obviously out of touch with the real people. Number two, according in the 12-step program of Diamond, they undermine the independence of the courts, such appointing not independent members of the court, but partial members of the court, who are mostly biased to the current or the sitting administration. Third, they also attack the independence of the media by denouncing them as as partisan families or bayaran or paid by a particular group, and mobilizing the people, mobilizing public fervor against them, and resulted to the starving of advertising revenue, regulating them, and taking over their ownership by crony capitalism, which might result into closure of some media entities as well. And number four, they try to gain control of any public broadcasting by politicizing it. No? For example, BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, assuming that there is an autocratic prime minister in UK right now, they have to change all the programs and make sure that that all the anchors, all the segments are in support of government programs and not critical of them. Number five, impose critical control of the internet in the name of morality, security, and counterterrorism. So they have to some extent, to censor, and try to strip down some of accounts, which I think, or which they believe that in contrary to the programs and policies of the government. Number six, subdue other elements of civil society, civic organization, even universities, and especially the anti-corruption and human rights group, by painting them as part of an arrogant, selfish elite that have betrayed the people and the country. Number seven, they intimidate the business community into ending its support for opposition. So they have to threaten the business will be closed down, and you will not be given another permit, and so on and so forth, if you continue to support this identified political opposition of the current administration. Number eight, enrich a class of crony capitalists by steering state contracts, credit laws, licenses, and other lucre to the family, friends, and allies of the ruler. And number nine, assert political control over civil service as well as the security apparatus, which include the police and the military. Number 10, gerrymander districts and rig off the electoral rules to make it nearly impossible for opposition parties to win in the election. Changing the rules of the game, making more favorable to the incumbent. Number 11, gain control over the body that runs the elections, tilt the electoral playing field, and institutionalize a de facto authoritarian rule. And number 12, repeat 1 to 11, and even more vigorously deepening citizens' fear of opposing or criticizing the new political order and silencing all forms of resistance. So these indicators and these policies, both written by Levitsky and Ziblatt, and another one by Larry Diamond, are as a good strategy to be able to accumulate political power and wealth, in the guise of serving the people through populist policies, no? By telling them and promising them that, that I am the last card, I am the last hope, I'm the Messiah, I'm the panacea in our country. Therefore, you have to support me in exchange of curtailing our civil liberties, our freedom of information, and among other things. Thus, what we are witnessing is the so-called the death of democracy is now typically administered into 8,000 casts. As famously mentioned by a Brazilian autocrat, Getulio Vargas, for my friends, anything, and for my enemies, the law. Now, this is because of this so-called playbook and the strategies imposed by political leaders, globally, it resulted to the so-called reverse of the wave of democratization. No, we are hoping, for example, that when Samuel Huntington written the third wave of democratization, the fourth and fifth wave will give us more opportunity to live and flourish in a more democratic space, more livable space, a smart space, a sustainable space. However, because of, again, perhaps the failure, as I mentioned earlier, the failure of liberal democracy, or the failure, for example, of crony capitalism, where business are not allowed to thrive competitively, where there's no freedom of information, people experience the chasm, the continuing chasm between the rich and the poor. And there's the emergence of new leaders who are promising them, almost everything to realize that to realize that what they promise are not really for the good of the people, which resulted to a liberal democracy. And this is what happened. For example, that's in this presentation, I would like to share with you some of the key leaders, globally, who made an turn into this type of strategy, the so-called reversal of democracy and illiberal democracy. Of course, first of which is Vladimir Putin, who is a Russian president. He used to be a KGB. This is a KGB in Russia. This is a secret, the so-called a secret, like a CIA, a highly operative people after Boris Yeltsin. What he did is that he planted people to become more loyal to Mr. Putin, and right now he's the longest president, of Russia, and people are not suffering, from freedom and also information in Russia. We also have the Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He used to be a very promising prime minister, especially with his party, the Justice and Peace Party in Turkey. In 2014, in 2012, he tried to become an active member of the European Union in a associate capacity. However, again, when he tend to experience power, he now looks for more power. So that's why he's embracing more autocratic policies, to combat his opposition. In fact, he changed the Turkish constitution, for 16 times, by his political party, to ensure that there will be no opposition group, that will also capture the seats. And he also captured the seats in the parliament, for bigger number. And he also asked to retire some of the members of the highest court, in Turkey. Of course, we have Xi Jinping. He's now considered as the president for life in China. He also amended the constitution in China to introduce a Xi Jinping thought. And you see, he's now challenging US in terms of their global leadership. Also, we have Narendra Modi, who's an Indian prime minister, who's now using his religious affiliation, of Hinduism, and try to control also the opposition, and to make sure that they are can no longer regain, their seats, in the Indian parliamentary, and also introducing harsh policies, especially against the Muslim and other religion in India right now. We also have Victor Orban, who is known as the author of the idea of illiberal democracy. So when we talk about illiberal democracy, it has basically three concepts. So what are the three key concepts of illiberal democracy? Number one is hostility against to pluralism. No? Victor Orban doesn't believe that various ideas should flourish. There should be one idea that should be dominant or become a dogmatic. No. Second, he believes that he need to restrict his opponents, including ethnic minorities, and narrowing their freedom of speech and information and association and assembly. And the third component of illiberal democracy, as promoted and espoused by Dr. Urban, is that he is into promoting the idea of nativism, which basically demonizes immigrants, or like sort of promoting xenophobia, no? And making them not part of the society. He was succeedingly followed by Polish Prime Minister Jarosław Kaczynski, who also trying to follow, the template of Viktor Orban in implementing policies and programs, in Polish right now. In fact, in Poland, you will notice there are groups, especially his political party PIS, supporting a Ku Klux Klan version in Polish, and White Europe and the Seghiel. These are the neo-Nazi group right now, in Poland, who are also been in support, by the government policies. And Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico also promoting an anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant line. We also have Jair Bolsonaro, a Brazilian president, who former police officers, also doing a war against drug policies, and it doesn't believe that COVID-19 virus is really a virus and sickness, and also in the forefront of curtailing basic liberties. And of course, we have the former President Donald Trump, who are now being supported by conspiracy theorists like Taquano, who believe that Donald Trump is a savior in the U.S. and in March 5 he will return as the president of the U.S. as promoting really anti-black, very racist policies. So common to all of the leaders that I mentioned basically are following the so-called playbook, with identified then by Larry Diamond and Steven Levitsky on how democracies are done. So if you look at this figure, so these are data where the decline, there's still a vertical decline, from Hungary, Turkey, Serbia, Brazil, India, in terms of their free and fair elections, the CSO representation, media bias, freedom of academic and cultural expression, and government media and censorship efforts. This data tell us that the indicators that mentioned are really in bad shape. Similar to the scale of indices, from 0 to 1. So if you look at the figure, for example, freedom of association, freedom of expression, getting below the blue-green color, it's really on negative aspect, in the negative side, in almost all parts of the region. So in the Liberal Democratic Index, these are the top 10 countries who are departed from the liberal democracy, now leading to an electoral autocracy. When we talk about electoral autocracy, which means the current regime will continue to be in the holder of power, and oppositions are only given either a token position or a token space, in terms of competition, and perhaps they have a difficulty right now of gaining the opportunity to lead again in these countries. So these are some indicators that would describe that we are really in the verge of the so-called autocratic regime. Now, having said this, and having described this glimmer picture of what we're happening to democracy, well, what will be the possible impact in terms of development, business, and having information? There's a documentary in Netflix right now called Saving Capitalism, and in last Sunday, former Chief Justice Arturo Panganiban wrote about saving capitalism and democracy and emphasizing the importance of working democratic institutions to be able to achieve business and development. In fact, in that article of CJ Panganiban, he mentioned how, for example, the business communities like the FINMA Group, the San Miguel corporations are really providing support for the Filipino and for our country in addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. So it did a lot of effort to do that. Perhaps without their help, it's really difficult right now for our country. So if we will consider the continuing crisis of democracy, what's now the possible impact and possible effect that will lead us, especially on the aspect of business information and development? What is clear right now is that the dying of democracy means less information and less freedom. And with no freedom of information, development, of course, cannot be achieved by the majority of the people. And with that, what we are experiencing, what will happen is that business will not thrive properly because we look at the crony capitalism as what we experienced during the Marcos regime, where business who are being identified with the opposition are being shut down, and we did not want to happen. And of course, we have to look at the corrupt practices that should not be tolerated, but rather punished. And at the end of the day, I think what we need at this point is simply a strong institutions. It's not strong men, plus freedom of information. It's what we need at this juncture. In addition of in this development is the concern that with the advent of information technology, especially of social media, Tom Nichols, on his book, The Death of Expertise, he said that the increasing democratic dissemination of information rather than producing an educated public has instead created of an army of ill-informed and angry citizens who denounce intellectual achievements and distrust of experts. In addition, we are also experiencing a historical denial and divisionism, which will not in any way help us further to achieve our desired development. Because at this juncture, what we need is a rightly, timely, and appropriate information that should be upheld at all times. Okay? Having said this, okay, may I invite everyone to go to our Padlet, okay? So, and I would like to ask, why is FOI important at this juncture? So you may answer and share your thought for this activity. You may start it now. Alex, you have some announcement, please?
Yes, our staff, Bern, will post the Padlet link here in our chat. And you can also scan. Can we go back to the presentation of Dean Gary, please, so that our participants may scan the QR code?
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
There we have it. Participants may scan the QR code here in front and join the Padlet discussion, or you may click the link posted by Bern in our chat box. So Catch, can we lead our participants on how to use the Padlet?
Sure, sharing my screen now. All right, so we already have a couple of comments on the Padlet, but if you want to add your own, you can click the button that I did just now. And then I'm going to share a meme. 1 second, you can click either the upload button, you can pick a file, you can pick a statement if you want. So I'm going to pick a file. And it will upload directly onto there. So if everybody gets that, we can have a few comments here already. Or if you want, you can post a meme, you can post any pictures that you want that's related to FOI. But please, let's stick to the topic, freedom of information, describe and cite why it's important.
Catch.
Yes, Coco.
Hi. I was the one who posted that this is cool. I've never seen this Padlet before, so it's fun to watch. Dean Gary, thank you very much for your presentation. I learned a lot and enjoyed a lot. I'll have to step out now, but thank you very much for doing this for us.
Pleasure to be part of this activity, Coco. See you soon.
We look forward to doing more with you. I really enjoyed that presentation.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Coco. As you can see, there are a lot of different viewpoints on the importance of FOI here, Catch. And it's very interesting, huh?
Yeah. Yes, maybe, I know we do have one here actually, twin good governance principles, talking about how FOI is a mechanism to enforce transparency and accountability. Sorry, what was that, Dean Gary?
No, what I'm saying is that perhaps you could help me to read so that later on I could process the result of this, the sharing of our participants, and then I'll do my summary and answer some of the questions. Thank you.
Sure, Dean Gary, no problem.
All right,
so just going through it, yeah, we already have so many comments, some memes.
Keep them coming, guys. For you, why is FOI important? As we have discussed yesterday, we have already discussed the fundamentals of FOI, and today, Dean Gary discussed, why FOI is important in maintaining our democracy. And so, in these 2 days of our workshop, let us synthesize, why do you think freedom of information is important, especially in this day and age? All right, here, Catch, we have some comments.
Yes, we have a few recurring themes, mainly how FOI is important for democracy, for development, and also to get transparency and accountability from our government. I think this comment is especially interesting about how FOI should be embedded in our political culture. That goes back to what Mayor Vico was saying earlier about how we really need to reform our institutions.
I very much agree, Catch. We also have an anonymous comment here saying that the key to good governance is a government founded on accountability and transparency to the people and for the people. And this is very much apparent, with again what Mayor Vico was saying earlier on, and of course what Dean Gary has been explaining a while ago. Just like what I also said, we are very much pushing for good governance, and we're very keen into these new wave of leaders who are champions of freedom of information, of transparency and accountability. And we really think that this is our first step. Ito yung pinaka-importanting step that we should be able to do so that one, we maintain our democracy, and two, we improve and strengthen our institutions.
Yes, that's quite right, Alex. As Mayor Vico was saying, if it's like the kitchen, if you can see the kitchen and what the chefs are doing, then you have a lot more confidence that what you're getting is clean government.
Very much agree. Okay, so there are comments here saying that FOI equates to accountability, transparency, good governance, and championing democracy. And that's very much correct. Since yesterday, we have been talking about this, and we have been explaining and doing a workshop on accountability and transparency and the importance of FOI and the role of FOI on it.
Oh, this is like this GIF right here.
Which one?
The FOI bill and the policymakers. That goes back to what we were saying yesterday with Regine about the challenges of passing an FOI bill, even though we can kind of see why it will be useful.
Yes, yes, Catch, that's true. Again, like what we have discussed yesterday, the FOI bill has been in the Congress since 1992. Imagine, FOI bill is even older than us. here
Yes,
here in the
it's true.
session. And so
They've been avoiding that bill for
yes,
20
they've been
years.
avoiding it. And so it's very important that the voice of the youth is now heard and that we actually move forward towards the passage of the FOI law.
Yes, that's quite right, Alex. I like this one as well about how we should know and exercise our rights. We can't ask for change if we still want the same government officials who don't consider the importance of transparency and accountability. That's true, right, Alex? FOI is enshrined in our constitution, as we were mentioning yesterday. So it is our right to ask for information within certain limits, of course.
Yes, agree. That's very much true, Catch. Just like what we have discussed yesterday, there are actually not only the Constitution, but surprisingly, there are several legal background into the freedom of information, even here in the Philippines, And so this is really, and then the missing piece na lang talaga is the FOI law. And that's something that we are pushing for right now.
This cat is adorable. The more you know, yes.
Yes.
I think this one on the left is also quite interesting regarding, I think this is a picture of the US Capitol. So it's talking about how you have freedom of information in the US, but you still have classified information. That's actually quite true because we note that freedom of information is qualified. There's some kinds of information that would not be helpful for national security, that would kind of compromise the Philippines' ability to negotiate on diplomatic tables. But of course, we come from like a point of view that this information should be available for the public.
That's true, Catch. Another comment here is it is FOI improves both the national and local government units as to their mechanisms, and of course, this is very important. Earns the trust of the Filipino people.
Yes, that's quite right, Alex. We really need to get, it really helps a lot with trust.
All right, I think, Dean, there are so many comments here already in our Padlet.
Yeah, really, we saw it as well. And I think there are more commonalities in terms of their comments and also their demand to pass the FOI right now. It's good that our youth also is leading in this campaign, and we look forward to sustain it. But nevertheless, perhaps I would like to share that the campaign for FOI should not only for development of business, but also for democracy, and that's something that I would like to put premium on this, because at the end of the day, we wanted to have not only a thriving business and a development that is being cascaded to majority of the people, but also an opportunity for a political growth and development. And that's the system that we could share it under a democratic policies. And yeah, let's all agree that opportunity, it's a communication, it's a transparency, and it seems that most if not all participants have a common idea of understanding it's what FOI bill, as mentioned by Mayor Bico. I think the reason that you are here is you are convinced that FOI, or you want to be more convinced that FOI is indeed an important law that we need to pass, not only an executive order, not only an ordinance in a particular city or municipality, but a law similar to the other countries who are experiencing the benefits of FOI. So see, essential to key government disclosure, strong institutions. Kasi sabi nga kanina, I think the component of any democratic regime right now is we have to ensure that there's a strong and working institutions. If we have that, check and balance will come in, and we have to ensure that abuses from all sectors will be a deal in accordance to our laws. Kasi naman, dapat sumunod tayo sa tuntunin ng ating mga batas. We have to follow the rule of law, not the rule of the incumbent. I think something that we need to be aware on that. Whoever the president is, whoever our leadership, it's always be the constitution, it's always be the rule of law that should be followed, and we have to enshrine on this, and an information which is not only for business transactions but for political affairs, for cultural activities are very much needed in our country. No, so FOI should not only be treated as simply easing out business or giving an information, but an opportunity also to get people more involved, to get people more educated, and to get people and to strengthen our institutions, our democratic institutions. That's siguro something that we could generate from this presentation. Opportunity to know government. I like knowing, di ba, yung mga memes dito. Sayang walang mga pictures. Kung may nagpa-picture sana about the FOI, yung mukha nila nag-promoting FOI, no? Sana baka may prize pa yon sa NBC. Wala tayong nakita ngayon dito eh. Anyway,
dapat pala
this is
nag-selfie
something.
ako din.
Oo nga.
With the hashtag #PassFOI now.
So
It's
yun
not
sana
yet
yung
too
kaya
late
natin
for
gawin.
our participants. If you want to post your selfie here in our Padlet, go ahead.
Oh, sana.
All right, Dean.
Yeah.
Right now, we actually have a very long list of questions. And
Okay.
we encourage the participants to send in more questions so that we can answer it.
Sure,
Dean,
sure.
we have a question here from Bianca Goncillo. With the issue on autocracy happening in other countries, do you think passing the FOI is a new step towards development for the Philippines? And can adopting FOI be treated as a strategy to transform autocratic governments?
Well, definitely. The very reason why I entitled my presentation as making democracy and development work through FOI, I simply recognize the fact that FOI can be a primary instrument. No? It's not a panacea, but it will open a lot of doors, a lot of opportunity for more reforms and for more development. No? Because if we are now feel safe that informations that can be available are there, and the transactions, economic transactions, business transactions are easily be known. So we know who are the people behind this. So we have idea that it will avoid, for example, cronyism. It will avoid that some conflict of interest, for example, or it will avoid people who will engage more to so-called monkey business, because we're transparent. Of course, we know the limits of FOI, especially on health and security, as mentioned earlier by Mayor Vico. No, we cannot divulge, for example, our national security strategy and information. No, we're not, because we still believe that there's a terrorism, there's issues of like health security, like what happened. But nevertheless, passing an FOI will be as not only a step, but like a key to open up door of opportunities for more reforms in our government. Kung seryoso tayo sa good governance, binigyan nga natin yung indicators of transparency, accountability, participation, rule of law, efficiency, and effectivity. These are something that will come in after we open the opportunity for FOI. No? Yun yung paniniwala natin doon.
Thank you very much, Dean. There is another anonymous question which I think is very relatable to you. How can the Academe help in pushing for the FOI law?
Well, I think there should be a consensus. A consensus where Academe will be more involved in not in this kind of discussions, but also the Academe community must also be part, for example, of perhaps drafting or suggesting on terms of strategizing the passage of FOI. No, halimbawa, in the Academe, in Availed, we have sons and daughters, of members of the legislative committee. So perhaps we could, convince their parents, to support and become a co-author of bills, for example, that have been submitted right now, both in House Representative and the Senate. So we have to make sure, or we could also perhaps study what the proposal, so the current executive order on PCCO, which is, I think, very useful and valuable for all of us. And so this is something that we need to involve. Or we have an association, for example, the Philippine Society for Public Administration. There are groups of political scientists, public administrators, who can also be tackled this type of issues, this type of campaign, that we need to mainstream, FOI, in the discussions, not only in the classroom, but also in in other fora, no, where it will capture more audience. And I've said, no, if I have students who are sons and daughters of, of congressmen and representatives, no, perhaps you could help them, no, to introduce, no, the idea of why FOI in the long run will be very helpful, no, for the Filipino community.
Thank you very much, Dean. There's another anonymous question here. The samples that you have given earlier, Dean, are leaders who are autocratic leaders. Now, can you give us some samples of world leaders who are strong advocates of freedom of information?
Well, of course, the championing institutions of that will definitely the U.S. government. No? Sabihin naman nila yan, no? Except, of course, what in the past when they experienced the leadership of former President Trump. No? But some welfare state countries, in particularly Sweden, Norway, no, these are countries, no, are the transparency are really embedded, no. Canada, including Canada as well, no. So I think this can be modeled, no, in terms of getting the right. UK also getting some information, no, that can be useful, no, for policy formulations, no, and can be part of the day-to-day activities of the people.
Thank you very much for that, Dean. I think we have here Yusek Chris Ablan from PCOO. And I know, Yusek Chris, we have been discussing, no, these past few meetings that we had on countries in the world with good FOI practices. Perhaps, Yusek, you can share it also to us po.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. There are several countries that practice FOI successfully. I'll just add to what Dean Jonicio already mentioned. You have New Zealand, you have Australia, you have the US, the UK, Netherlands, and well, here in Asia, no, tayo yung nangunguna, although Thailand and Indonesia have their respective FOI laws. I'm proud to share with our participants this afternoon that while we do not have a law, we do implement FOI better than many countries in Asia, many countries in Africa. Actually, may batas lang sila dun, Alex, but they're not able to implement it. Another examples would be in South Asia, India and Sri Lanka. Actually, both have information commissions, and they're very active insofar as civil society is concerned, and the government has created several layers of information commissions. So those are just examples of the many countries that implement FOI well. Overall, we have more than 120. The United Nations actually recognizes EO number 2 as an FOI policy. Pero syempre, gaya ng sinabi ni Dean Jonicio, mas maganda kung may batas tayo. At syempre, yesterday, sabi din ni Ma'am Rodriguez na hopefully, no, through the help of Deputy Speaker Rufus, will eventually have an FOI law.
Thank you very much, Yusek Chris. Dean Gary, going back to our questions from Jeremiah Silvestre. Your sharing actually validates what's happening currently and is alarming. Aside from expressing our dissent to the current political climate, what can the youth do to uphold democracy without being tagged as anti-government? Additionally, how can we involve the poor or other sectors in upholding democracy in relation to the language that they can understand and experience that they can relate to?
Well, number one, you have to study hard. I mean, our youth should also be choosy of what information that they are reading. As I mentioned earlier, there's a book written by Tom Nichols, The Death of Expertise. No? People tend to believe to unverified popular writer who have not been trained and not promoting evidence-based approaches and not into a scientific basis at all. So that's something that we need to be wary of. Number one, no, should be critical in terms of getting the right the appropriate information. I don't say the right, but rather evidence-based information. No, in terms of involving, for example, the majority of the sector. Well, perhaps there are student groups and youth groups, especially our SK. I mean, they have to be involved at the local governance. No? SK are elected officials, and we have to ensure that part of their mandate is not really simply also the clean and green and the basketball thing kasi hindi mo na magagawa ngayon kasi pandemic yan. No? But we can more do on innovative activities and which we can involve more number of youth in terms of getting their ideas and leading them into a right-based approach also in terms of in getting the program. No, yun yung natin. Basta always follow the rule of law. That's something that also we have to be also conscious about it. No, yun yung natin. No? And be active, especially in engaging your barangay. So nga pala sa barangay, pwede kayong magtanong sa SK, sa barangay nyo, sa city, sa municipality, sa provinces, ask questions, and and not also ask questions, but also promote some solutions. Hindi lang tayo oppose and expose. We have also to do some propose. So something that our youth must be very ngayon. Kasi ngayon, I think you're more techie than us. You're more into a lot of readings and information. So kailangan natin maging critical on this, Alex.
Thank you very much, Dean. There's a question here from Isabel Rivera. Thank you for the informative presentation, Dean. What are the indirect or direct impacts of Hungary's movement towards a liberal democracy to EU and the ASEAN, particularly in our country? How will the FOI efforts combat possible transition of our country's prevailing system in a place to an electoral autocracy?
Oh, that's very nice question. You look at what happened in Hungary when they started the so-called illiberal democracy and explained earlier what illiberal democracy is. Number one, it's basically against pluralism, against immigrants, and basically limiting the role of the dissent. So there's really a wave of that thoughts in Europe, especially what happened during the Arab Spring. Remember, Alex, class natin in a political geography class when we studied what happened in Syria, what happened in Iraq, and happened in all this incident. When there was a so-called Arab Spring Revolution, and it came to content because it's now questions whether you are supporting ISIS or the authoritarian regime. So migrants moved into Europe. So people tend to accept the fact that hey, they are robbing our jobs, they're getting all the opportunities. So may ganung feeling sa Europe, and it was amplified, especially by Viktor Orban. But of course, in other European states like Germany, meron naman silang, they embrace this. But the thing is, it's because of the also economic inequality, because of the lack of jobs and opportunity. People been tried to take that bait. These immigrants are getting our jobs, wala nang trabaho, ngayon anya pa sila kukunin trabaho natin. So that's really amplified. So sa Europe, naging mataas yung ganyang value of illiberal democracy. Sa Asia, hindi naman. Sa Pilipinas, hindi naman kasi we still continue naman to patronize our foreigners. Wala naman tayong xenophobia dito, although may some cases ng konti. Pero I'm sure you continue to enjoy, for example, K-pop and among other things. So walang malayo pa yung illiberal democracy sa Pilipinas. Although there are some concerns that could be addressed, and hopefully we could address this on the legal fronts, following the rule of law. So yun yung natin. So mas attractive ang illiberal democracy in Europe and to some extent diba, in the US, when especially during the time of President Trump.
Not to attack the K-pop stans, sir.
Yeah, of course, definitely. Maraming magre-revolution ng kabataan.
Magre-revolution, sir.
Kapag
don't mess with the K-pop groups. Sorry, Alex, you were saying.
Yes, thank you very much, Dean. I think this is the last question here, and it's a very interesting question. Democratization is a challenge in Southeast Asia region due to its historical and economic position. Considering all the context and political infrastructure in place and global rise of authoritarian rule and right-wing populism, how can we champion democracy in our region especially in the Philippines? How can we fight democratic backsliding and the shrinking spaces of democracy in our country? This is from Paul Andre Rosette.
Okay, it's a nice question. Kanina when I tried to figure out at least 4 key indicators with so many definitions of what democracy is, sabi ko number 1 doon yung freedom to choose a leader, no? Eventually, if we are dissatisfied with what's happening right now, there's an election. We have to make sure that we are voting which do you think, no, are the appropriate leaders in our country that will espouse the rule of law, will follow the constitutions, our Philippine Constitution, and will promote transparency, accountability, no, and development, no, for our society. So, yun yung the most important thing that we need to do, no? Kasi citizenship does not, and our duty does not end during the elections lang. So, tandaan din natin, after election should also be involved, as I've mentioned earlier, in getting to know what's happening right now, wag lang sa social media, no, para malaman natin what's really happening, no, in terms of policies, in terms of law, that's really included, no. We want to be part of the policy making, or you join the election, or you organize groups, no, to be a watchdog in any case, for example, of corruption or any types of abuses. So maraming pwedeng gawin. In the school, di ba, we're promoting this critical thinking. We're promoting various activities, no. This is all good learning sessions. Wala kasing hard and fast rule, no, in changing all and addressing all the problems in our society, no. At like I said kanina, when democracy happened during the first and second wave and third wave of democratization, it took a lot of years. Hindi yun a low-hanging fruit, no. It took a lot of years, patience, struggles before to change it. So hindi ganoon ang gusto nating mangyari, that right there and there, agad-agad, sabi nga ng iba, na we want to change what we have done. That's why itong freedom of information na meron tayo ngayon, it's good that the PCSO started it, and hopefully we campaign for that this proposed bill should become a law. It's one opportunity over that, and will open more opportunity also for more reforms in our society, in our country in particular. So yun, Alex. Maraming salamat.
Thank you very much, Dean Gary, on behalf of MBC, including our Executive Director, Coco Alcoas. We thank you for joining us and gracing us with your time today. Again, we encourage our participants, ang dami nating discussions dito this afternoon, to tweet and post your FYI on FOI experience on Twitter and Facebook, and use our official hashtag FYI on FOI, hashtag MBC for FOI, and hashtag PassFOI now. Now, after 2 days of learning about the fundamentals of FOI and listening to different perspectives, it is time for us to actually experience how to request for data through the eFOI portal. Now, may we call on PCOO Undersecretary Chris Ablan for our FOI practice.
Thanks, Alex. Good afternoon, Coco. Good afternoon, Dean Gary. Hi, Catch. Good afternoon, Mayor Vico, Sir Ryan, and the rest of the participants. Thank you so much for having us during your activity with all of the youth leaders around the country. I can see you have more than 150, and we're very, very happy from the PCOO to see new faces, because we used to just see, the familiar ones. So it's nice to see other faces, especially from the youth groups. Of course, we have our friends from the FYI. All right, so I have a couple of minutes to share. We have our, let's see if I can share our eFOI. So we do have a portal, we do have a working website, and we're very hopeful that with the passage of the law, this website will continue to be working even after the administration. That is one of our fears at the Project Management Office, Alex and Catch, is after the administration, all of our efforts to create a community of FOI practitioners will be for naught, because hold on, let me just share it. Okay. Hold on, guys. It's just not showing on my screen. There you go. Okay, so I hope you guys can see the slides.
Yes,
see
we
it,
can
Katz?
see it. Yes, po, we can see it.
All right. All right, so we do have a working website. And first and foremost, no, I don't know, you guys had several speakers since yesterday, and I'm hopeful that you guys aren't overwhelmed with anything to do with FOI. But in case you haven't heard, no, we do have an executive order. It's EO number 2, series of 2016, signed by the president. It is only his second EO, right after creating the Office of the Cabinet Secretary back in July. And the story goes is that our friends from Right to Know Right Now coalition really tried to pressure the president to sign this executive order, and that is number 2, series of 2016. The executive order covers not only documents, but other sources of information such as audio-visual presentations, maps, contracts, data sets, and statistics. We'd like to share, with your permission, Coco and Alex, that we do try to advocate FOI more than a tool to combat corruption and to advocate transparency. FOI is also another tool to fight fake news. When you hear about information coming from government, might as well verify it using freedom of information by logging onto our website. You can actually log on right now. It's foi.gov.ph. And issues such as vaccines, COVID-19, SAP, build. You can actually search for the government agency concerned, and you can ask them a question, and they will have to answer you following the policy. FOI can also be used for academic research. We know that many of you leaders and students are doing your thesis or dissertation or capstones, and you can actually use FOI to download statistics coming from agencies such as the Philippine Statistics Authority, the DOLE, and DPWH, and whatnot. I would also like to advocate FOI as a tool for innovation. Many of our software developers depend on datasets, traffic datasets, geomaps, and other statistics to create the next generation of applications. And you can actually request these information from government agencies like the DICT, DOST. And finally, Coco and Catch and Alex, we'd like to advocate FOI as a tool for empowerment. People have been asking me what's the difference between Executive Order number 2 and previous to that, since there was already Transparency Seal, Open Data, and other proactive disclosure initiatives. The difference is the Executive Order tries to flatten the community of inequality. If before you need to have someone inside to be able to get information about different government scholarships, different government subsidies and grants, no? Usually ang kakilala lang ang nakatanggap nun ay makakilala ng regional director, malapit kay congressman, anak ni senator. Right now, if you want to find out, regardless of who you are, young or old, rich or poor, connected or not, you'll be able to request for information, and the government agency cannot ignore you. The government now has to respond to you within a set period. In the national government, under EO number 2, that is 15 working days. In other agencies like local government units by Mayor Vico, they have a shorter period. And so the important thing is that there is a period to respond. Ang iniiwasan natin ay tatanong ka sa gobyerno tapos di ka papansinin ng 30 days, one year, no, or forever. So there, the screen shows you the many uses of FOI. It's not only a transparency tool, but it is a transparency tool. It's also used for academic research, innovation, and empowerment. I'll just show you some examples, no, on information that you guys can request, and these are all successful FOI requests. This is a guy who wanted to study software development and wanted to find out which state university or college offered software development, and requested the information from the Commission on Higher Education. And CHED disclosed the number of enrollees in game development courses. So that was the closest data set that they had. And I think it helped the FOI requester. You can actually use FOI also for your research. No, you want to find out since the pandemic came in 1 year ago, How many people filled in the vacancies, no, for health workers, whether they're doctors, nurses, midwives. So yan, kita nyo naman sa slide kung yung unfilled position. So kung meron pa. So, we have hunches. We express our opinions on Twitter, on Facebook, and sometimes, it's better if our wala. Okay, so nawala yung sa akin, pero at least
we can still see it.
I
Yeah.
can still see it po.
Yeah. So si Pearl already took over. Next slide. You want to do some further research about local job displacement, and they requested this from the Department of Labor and Employment, and there you go. You can see talaga, no? FOI can confirm our opinions. We do have opinions about certain things, and it's better, no, if businesses should not be the only beneficiary of data and evidence based, no. So even us, no, we want to confirm our theories. You use FOI to request that information. So this one is a successful one from the Department of Labor and Employment. Next slide. FOI is local, and hopefully we have our youth groups from Region 10. I saw many participants coming from Cagayan de Oro. Surprise, no? Andyan naman yung connection ni DS Rodriguez. Pero CDO does not have an FOI ordinance, and hopefully after this, no, ma-pressure nyo yung local sanggunian, whether it's the City Council of CDO or the province. Next slide, please. So this will also, okay, so why do we need to advocate FOI in the local government? Because a lot of information is actually in the local government level. Hindi lahat nasa national government. And even if national government collects the data, we do not have the updated data. For example, data regarding our hospital to bed ratio. That information is actually reported to the Department of Health, but the Department of Health actually collects data from 2017, similar also with PSA and DOLE. So dated po, no, ang information ng national government agencies because of the bureaucratic inertia. So local governments have up-to-date information, and that's one of the reasons why we really advocate local LGU FOI. The slide shows you other information related to COVID, like SAP budget credited to barangays, calamity assistance for municipalities. So, for example, information such as SAP, information such as CAMP coming from DBM, and they're downloaded down to the LGUs. Now, if you ask that information from DOLE or from DBM, you will only find the lump sum. But if you want to go to the details, you have to ask it from the local government unit. So that's my example on why it's important to have FOI across the political spectrum, from national government all the way down to the barangay. Next slide. I'm sorry, guys, if I'm talking too fast. No, I have lots of things to say in such a short time. So we do have a joint memorandum circular together with the DILG, signed by Secretary Andanar and Secretary Anyo, in 2018, encouraging local government units to pass their FOI ordinances. And we're very, very happy to announce that we have almost 50 local government units with FOI ordinances. Next slide, please. Incidentally, if you do need a template, you can actually download it on our website, foi.gov.ph/resources. And if you need assistance, we have our compliance and monitoring division who will be more than happy to guest at your city council meeting to discuss how to implement FOI. In fact, we will be visiting Paniki, Tarlac in April and help the local government of Paniki implement their FOI program. Next slide. So there, we have 49 LGUs with FOI ordinances. Next. So here they are, because of time constraints, I won't be able to read each and every one, but you can take a snapshot right now. And obviously, Pasig was one of the first LGUs in Metro Manila, and Mayor Vico already mentioned his ugnayan sa Pasig, which is the umbrella office of his Freedom of Information. So there, so hopefully magkaroon na po ang CDO. If I'm not mistaken, wala pa sila eh. So hopefully magpass na ng FOI ordinance ang CDO as well as ang other LGUs ng Region 10. Next slide. All right, so we have, when the president signed the Freedom of Information Executive Order back in 2016, and even all of the FOI bills since 2000, since 1987, 1988, in their mindset, FOI was actually just a paper-based policy. Meaning to say, you would have to physically go to a government office, fill out a form, submit it to an FOI officer, and then go home and wait for the period, 15 working days. And even when the president signed this back in 2016, yun talaga yung ating program. But it's the 21st century and everything is online. So together with our friends from the World Bank, and our friends from SIMF, which is a software developer based in Cebu, we developed the FOI portal. It's foi.gov.ph. We started out with only 16 government agencies, including PCOO, and it was all voluntary because the executive order did not require them to do it. And we were very aggressive through the years. So from 16 agencies in November 2016, we've now have 516. So we've increased by 500 in a matter of 4 years. And we have practically 98% of national government agencies, state universities and colleges, government-owned or controlled corporations, and the only sector that we are not able to fully have them comply are local water districts. And so there we have 516 of them. We also have some local governments online, including Pasig. So the Pasig City portal is connected already with our FOI website. So if you want to request anything from Pasig, you don't have to be a resident of Pasig. You don't have to go to the traffic of Pasig to request for information. You can request it from the comfort of your home. And this actually benefits not only our citizens in Metro Manila, but very much our kababayans from the Visayas and Mindanao. And more importantly, our kababayans who are living overseas. Yung mga kamag-anak nila, kino-convince sila, oh, kuya, ate, magpadala kayo ng pera. Nag-apply ako ng something from TESDA or from DTI. So that person can actually verify if the program is true or not. So many uses of FOI. FOI is a Swiss knife, no, for our information. Next slide. Oh, Pearl, can you go back, rewind back, no? So we have around more than 50,000 FOI requests online, and you don't actually have to request information anymore. If you look at the website, there's already a search tool. So this is Google for government. And so out of the 50,000 FOI requests, you can actually just key in keywords. So you type in COVID-19. So lalabas lahat dyan ng mga nagtanong tungkol sa COVID-19. So you may not have to wait 15 days. For all you know, yung gusto mong tanungin ay nasagot na ng ahensya. You can even type Mocha Uson to find out where she was when she was a PCO ASEC. So wala lang, yun lang. Next slide. This is just a breakdown of what people have been asking. So 75% requests for statistics, data sets, and 3% requests for legal documents such as copies of Republic Acts, executive orders. And take a look at number 3, at the third vector. Only 1% request for personal information. So Coco, this answers the query about from our policy makers who fear FOI will be used by their political opponents to harass them. And I tell the senators and I tell the congressmen, Senator, people don't need to use FOI to find out where you live, where your children study. You post that on your Twitter and your Facebook, so they don't need FOI. People are more intelligent than we assume them to be. And they know what FOI is for. FOI is for downloading of data sets, downloading of Republic Acts. So they don't need FOI to lurk or to do research on you. They don't use that for.
I'm not supposed to interrupt. I'm not supposed to interrupt you, Chris, but when you tell that to the lawmakers, do some of them get persuaded?
Sometimes they smile. I don't know how to interpret their smile. Actually, their next argument there is I'm pushing for the FOI law for my self-interest, no? So because in our version, it creates institutionalizes the project management office into an FOI office, the FOI commission, And doon pumupunta yung argument, Coco, no? Sinasabi nila, oh, ASEC pa ako no? You're only, sinusulong mo lang yan para meron kang security of tenure, no? So it's not true. So yun, that's how the conversation goes. So it's very important to have friends from the Makati Business Club as well as everyone here para naman pag iba yung magsabi, hindi nila isipin na nagpro-promote lang kami ng aming self-interest. And that's the last thing, no? If they want a provision there that says that the incumbent program director of the FYI PMO is disqualified, kahit na naka-all caps saka bold yan, pwede na eh. Next slide.
Thanks, Yusek.
All right, so no worries. Ano yung purpose? We actually ask, so FOI guys is purpose blind. The government agency cannot deny a request because of the purpose, but we do collect the purpose for, for monitoring purposes. So 56% of FOI requests, they request it because of research. 23% use it for their school thesis and reports. So that's around 80+%. No, they use it for research and school, and 21% are for personal consumption. So that's the breakdown of the purpose. Next slide. Okay, so who are the EFOI users? So you can see on the screen, 29% come from the Academe. This is already a hodgepodge of teachers, researchers, and students. 20% come from government. So you see, FOI is not only for the public, FOI is also for government agencies. You know, Sir Coco, Alex, and Katch, sometimes even us in government. And you guys know this from COVID response. Agencies were reluctant to share their information with their counterpart agencies across the bureaucracy. And so you can see here 20% of FOI users come from government because, minsan pahirapan din, no, from government to government. 11% come from local government. They want to find out projects coming from the national government. 6% come from civil society. Only 2% originate from the media. So here's some trivia. Our friends from the media don't use FOI for the simple reason that they cannot wait 15 days long. By that time, the news is stale already. So they still rely on their moles inside government agencies. And 32% are people we do not know where to classify them. So they're the others. So a big chunk, no, of our FOI users come from the Academe and / the youth. Next slide. Okay, so here's how you can navigate. You guys are all part of Generation Alpha, Generation Z or Generation Alpha. So you guys already are digitally informed, ingrained in your DNA. But for the sake of going through the motions, you can browse requests. So like I mentioned before, you can search for keywords and then lalabas na yung mga natanong na before. So you can browse the requests, you can browse it using the agencies, you can browse it using the different sectors. Next slide. This is a breakdown. So the website is a public site. I'll repeat it. The website is a public site. If you request information, your question will be readable by others. There was an incident at the early days of the website. Dean Gary, Coco, Katch, and Alex, wherein the requester thought that the thread, because it does look like a Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, or Viber conversation, he thought that it was a private message, and he found out that the FOI officer was his kumpare, and they were exchanging personal information. So we had to take that down because it revealed personal information, and so we have to warn people that when you request for information, your question will be published. It's because we adopt a policy of disclose to one, disclose to all. We learned that the interest of one person is also the interest of his neighbor. So might as well share. Kesa naman paulit-ulit na nagtatanong, might as well share it already. So you can see on the slide an example of an FOI request. The information you supplied on the EFI request form is published. Your message is published. The response of the agency is published, and you have an option to print it for proof and to have a paper trail. Next slide. Okay, so you can view the agencies. So we have redesigned the website because there are several agencies that aren't grouped together according to their sector. So now you can actually view agencies according to sector. So I'll give you an example. The Commission on Filipino Overseas, or CFO, should be paired together with DOLE, POEA, and OWA, and other labor-related agencies. But in the old website, they weren't, for the simple reason that CFO is an agency under the Office of the President. So magkahiwalay. So we redesigned the website based on sectors. And now if you look at labor, you can see the Commission on Filipino Overseas. Next slide. If you want to download our materials such as the FOI Ordinance, our memorandum circulars, the executive order, the inventory of exceptions, IATF resolutions, because we're a COVID supporter, and our other publications, materials, and templates, you can download those on foi.gov.ph/resources. Next slide. If you have any questions, we have an FAQ page. Next. Okay, so if you want an in-depth discussion of FOI, including a more detailed explanation of the exceptions, because we have 9, you can sign up for our massive open online course, or MOOC, together with DAP, Project Sparta, and DOSTP Shared at coursebank.ph. Hanapin nyo lang po ang FOI 101 course. So we will be explaining and then you earn an e-certificate after. So for those of you who are interested, please sign up for our FOI 101 online course. Next slide. We also try to magpa-plug na ako, Alex, Catch, and Coco, no? We do have our FOI Student Ambassadors. These are we designate an FOI ambassador per state university and college, and even private institutions. Usually this is the student council president or the editor-in-chief of the college of the university student publication. And they are our focals for that SUC or for that HEI. And we cascade to them whatever projects and programs we have. And so for those of you who are SK leaders here, we can come up with some kind of FOI student ambassador. This one, Zumustahan, with our current crop of FOI student ambassadors from last year, will actually be held on March 17. Next slide. On March 23, in celebration of Women's Month, we do have our CSO hangout for women and the LGBTQ community. So if you're interested, please sign up on bit.ly/FOI hangouts. There's just massive amounts of information that government has. Based on our last tally, we have over 300,000 documents, data sets, government covers everything, not only business. We're in sciences, we're in education, we're in health, we're in youth, name any sector, government is monitoring it. Government is regulating it. And so if government is regulating it, government is collecting information. If government is collecting information, you have a right to access that information as a taxpayer, as a citizen, protected by Section 73 of the 1987 Constitution. And the women's sector and the LGBTQ sector is showing to be a sector that we are interested in. For example, i-plug in ko lang, we will be having this event to celebrate Open Government Week this coming May, and we're tying up with the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency on where agencies use their 5% gender and development budget. Now, 5% is actually big. Compute nyo, ilang billion ang budget ng DPWH? That's billions. Or 5% of that goes to gender and development. You have a right to find out where does the DPWH spend its gender and development budget. So there. So we have this tie-up with the Philippine Commission on Women as well as the Commission on Human Rights. So this year, 2021, is not only our year with MBC, it's also our year with CHR and PCW. Next slide. we're also on our very famous radio and television outlets, guys. Every Friday at 6 p.m. we have FOI sa radyo, and also every Sunday at 8:30 we have our FYI TV show. What happens here is we put a spin on proactive disclosure, and we invite government agencies, little known government agencies like the National Meat Inspection Service or NMIS, PCW, CFO, and explain to the public what their agencies do. Kasi usually, di ba, ang kilala lang natin is DPWH for Build, DOTR, the usual suspects that, we have almost 200 government agencies, guys, and we're featuring them on our TV show. So I forgot who our guest is this coming Friday and Sunday, but please do follow us. Next slide. And finally, we're on social media, guys. So please like, subscribe, and follow our social media pages. FOI Philippines. On Twitter, we are FOI_PH. And on Instagram, we're FOIPH. We're also on YouTube, FOI Philippines. And again, don't forget, the reason why I'm speaking before you this afternoon is our website. It's foi.gov.ph. We have, again, in summary, over 500 government agencies. You do not need to stand up from your bed and go to DPWH if you want to find out what's the status of the big ticket infrastructure project. You can find DPWH and ask them. And hopefully, like what was mentioned by Dean Gary, if you have any connection with any policymaker, please help us help MBC convince our lawmakers to pass an FOI law. We are afraid that the community of FOI practitioners and users, we have almost 4,000 or more than 4,000 FOI officers around the country, guys. And if we don't have a law by next year, sayang yung ginawa natin na paghihirap na to show the people that FOI works. So with that, time check natin is 3:35. Thank you so much for the opportunity, MBC, Alex, Coco, and Catch. Back to you guys.
Thank you very much, USEC. Through the EFOI portal, totoo ngang requesting for public data now becomes easier. And now, if you have any questions and clarifications to Undersecretary Chris Ablan, please do share it in our Q&A box and even in our chat box. But here, USEC, we already have a question queue actually. Question from Alan Sobrepen of UP Diliman. There is a big possibility that the institutionalization of the FOI through the passage of a law will be hijacked and severely watered down by scrupulous personalities in Congress. They can claim that they have passed an FOI law, but it is also watered down and restrictive, that the spirit of an FOI is lost. This is assuming that the FOI will really take traction in Congress. How do we ensure that this will never happen? And there's a follow-up question here, Yusek, but go ahead, please answer this po muna.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Alan, for your question. My answer to that is to adopt the Executive Order number 2. I think the version of Deputy Speaker Rodriguez includes a listing of the exceptions, and that's a slippery slope because if we do enumerate the different exceptions, we will never hear the end of it because every year there are additions of information that should be withheld from the public. So our recommendation is to adopt the practice that we had in Executive Order and have a basic list, not an exhaustive list. So have a basic list. So data privacy has to be there. National security has to be there. But anything else should be delegated to the Office of the Solicitor General and the DOJ for updates. Otherwise, hindi mag-e-end yung debates. If you check the records, karamihan ng delays ng FOI in the past was because the lawmakers couldn't agree as to the list of exceptions. And we have what you call an Interagency FOI Exceptions Committee. And every year we meet. And every year kasi may dagdag na mga exceptions. I mean, for example, there is an additional exception to FOI under the Anti-Terrorism Act. And so that has to be included. And so if we wait until all of the possible exceptions are included in the bill, we might not have a bill ever. So that's one thing. In order for us to have an FOI law that is in tune with the times, the list of exceptions must not be within the law. It must be delegated to an authority knowledgeable on information disclosure. So OSG and the DOJ. It has worked under the executive order. Next thing, you guys have to continuously lobby, not just convince them to pass an FOI law, but to be at the during the committee hearing. So we still do not have a committee hearing at the House of Representatives. The Senate is just waiting for the move of Chairman Jojo Lara of Cagayan Valley, not Cagayan de Oro, Cagayan Valley, to hold a committee hearing. And we're very hopeful that our friends from Youth Alliance for FOI and FOI Youth Initiative and MBC will be there to actively guard our lawmakers from diluting the FOI bill and the FOI law.
Thank you very much, Yusek. In relation to the exceptions, there is a follow-up question po here. If the SALN portion of the bill is the problem, can we just proceed without it?
Yes, because the statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth is governed by a different law. It's Republic Act 6713. So yes, SALN can be, but update ko kayo guys, no? I mean, the only reason why we're having problems with the SALN is because government couldn't figure out how to reconcile the SALN and the Data Privacy Act. So since 2017 pa lang, Coco, Alex, and Catch, we already wrote to the Civil Service Commission to revise the SALN form because there are certain items in the SALN form that do not comply anymore with the Data Privacy Act. For example, the listing of unmarried minor children of the declarant. Under the Data Privacy Act, the names and birth dates are actually considered sensitive personal information. So we've already submitted our proposal to the CSC, and I talked with Director Cindy Lim of the CSC, and according to her Assistant Commissioner Ronquillo, more or less they're finalizing the revised SALN form. So hopefully, guys, when the revised SALN form comes out, we won't have this issue with the different agencies reluctant to disclose the SALN form. So they have their legal basis, but from my end, I think one of the reasons is it's very difficult to harmonize the SALN law and the Data Privacy Act given the present form of the SALN form, which is 2008 pa yung version eh. So it has to be updated. So ano lang yun, little tidbit lang yun. But to answer your question, yes, you can leave out the SALN from the FOI bill simply because SALN is covered by a separate law already, Republic Act 6713.
I think Coco has a follow-up question on that. Coco? Hello, Coco? There might be some technical difficulties on his end. We can try to go back to Coco in a while. But here, there's another question. Yusek Chris, Benica Ventilacion asks, with an FOI in place, how will it encourage citizen oversight in terms of the acts and plans of the government?
Oh my gosh, you can use FOI for, for intelligent discourse. You can use it for debate. Can you imagine, well, before, you really have to search the ends of the world to get the information to have a proper debate with the congressman, to have a proper debate with the senators, because there is information asymmetry. They have access to this kind of information, and when you have a debate with them and you don't have access to that, they will probably win the debate. But using FOI, you can request for the same information they are requesting from NEDA, they are requesting from PSA. And when they say some statistics, you can counter them with other kinds of statistics. So you can actually participate in governance better with freedom of information because you now have access to information that is traditionally exclusively within the parameters of senators and congressmen. Now you're in the same footing. You can get the same information from the agencies they request. So, you can debate them to your heart's content.
Thank you very much, Yusek. Philip Luis Embate from the Youth Centrist Union asks, hi Yusek, good afternoon. Can we also obtain Philippine jurisprudence from the website?
Okay. Unfortunately, no. The executive order, because it's an executive order, covers only the executive branch. And Policy 101, we have 3 branches of government, and decisions of the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, they all fall under the jurisdiction of the judicial branch. And unfortunately, it does not fall under the FOI program. And so, no. If we do have a law, then yes. So that's another major difference. Once the law is set, then it includes the judiciary, the legislature, our constitutional commissions. So right now, the executive order only applies to national government agencies. But you guys, you can just Google the jurisprudence. It's uploaded naman sa Supreme Court website saka sa Arellano website.
Thank you, Yusek. There are 2 more questions here. An anonymous question. We have an FY ordinance here, but it is not being fully implemented. I suppose this is in the local government unit. Does FOI Project Management Office have the mechanism for monitoring and obliging the LGU to implement their FOI policy?
We can monitor them, but we can, in addition to that, we can actually also give them technical assistance. And like I mentioned earlier, we're actually visiting Paniki, Tarlac in April in order to capacitate the local government. Kasi nga ang nangyayari no sa 49, no, while I'm very proud of the 49 FOI ordinances, a lot of them are just cut and paste. No, we were able to convince a lawmaker to sponsor this ordinance, and they were able to convince the vice mayor and the mayor to sign on, but it's hindi nila na ini-implement. So we're conscious of that. No? Of course, you have the exceptions. Exception is Pasig, to the leadership of Mayor Soto. He was able to implement it with ugnayan sa Pasig. Another example is South Cotabato, through the leadership of Governor Tamayo. Before then, it was Governor Daisy Evans Fuentes. They're able to implement it, but by and large, a majority of the 49 LGUs only have an ordinance and have not implemented it properly. Our office can provide technical assistance, so please inform us via Facebook Messenger, FOI Philippines, and we will help your local government make FOI implementable or operational in your LGU.
Yusek, this is a personal question. No? For those who are, for our SK officials who are here with us this afternoon, how important is their role in pushing for or encouraging their local government units in passing their own FOI ordinances, and what can they actually do to persuade their local governments to push and to pass their own ordinances in their locality?
Thanks, Alex. We really depend on youth leaders such as the Sangguniang Kabataan to convince our local government units to pass their FOI ordinances. Number one, because we can't do it alone. There are more than literally 1,500 LGUs, and it's impossible for us to talk to each LGU. So if you are a SK leader right now, please help us in your locality and convince your leaders to pass an FOI ordinance. Like I mentioned, not all information is with the national government. The nitty-gritty of information is collected by the local governments. No, nitty-gritty information like barangay health data are collected by the barangay health workers or the rural health workers, RHW, submitted to the municipal health officer. And then, Alex, we have the implementation of the Mandanas-Garcia ruling of the Supreme Court. By 2022, as much as 27% of the internal revenue allotment of LGUs will be increased. And so more services that the national government is actually using will be downloaded to the local government. Programs such as the health professionals program, which is the doctors to the barrios, nurses to the barrios, these will be devolved to local government. So now the citizen has more right to request for information from LGUs. So as SK leaders, if some of you here would probably be the SK Federated President and therefore sit in the local council as an ex officio member. Please sponsor an FYI ordinance. And if you need help, please don't hesitate to contact us and we will try to provide you with technical assistance. So there, I hope I answered the question, Alex, and I do hope our SK youth leaders here are able to convince their LGUs to pass their FYI ordinance because information is local.
Thank you very much, Yusek Chris. There's another question here from James Andrew Monilla. Do you think, Yusek, that the FOI will be passed during the current president's term?
I am hopeful, James, because this is already, for all intents and purposes, one of the successful programs of the Duterte administration. We're very proud and happy that amongst the many programs initiated back in 2016, FOI is alive and kicking in 2021. And we're very hopeful that one of the many positive programs of the Duterte admin at the end of June 30, 2022. And hopefully, we have a law to continue to continue the program. Kasi sayang eh. So we already have more than 50,000 requests online. Offline is a different story. We have 500 agencies on board the FOI website. We have 4,000 FOI officers, and sayang yung community. People are just starting to ask now. Kasi usually talaga they didn't know na pwede pala sila magtanong. So people are just asking now. Our FOI requests, Alex and James, doubled in 2020 because of COVID. People couldn't leave. People found out about foi.gov.ph, and that's where they ask. So we see FOI requests will grow exponentially in the coming years, and hopefully we have a law to back that up.
Thank you, Mayor Vico, Dean Gary, and Yusek Chris, and thank you everyone for your questions, comments, and interest, burning passion actually, in freedom of information. If you have any questions, please do reach out to us at foi@mbc.com.ph. And that's it. This has been FYI on FOI Workshop for the Youth. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our facilitators, speakers, and partners. Stay safe and have a good week.